Okay, so basically, we have just one thing on our agenda tonight. We realize there's a number of initiatives and things that concern East Norwalk right now, but the most pressing of which is one that's an upcoming hearing, and it's the cemetery/mill pond development special permit application. So that is going to be the entire focus of our meeting tonight. And just a quick note that our next meeting technically is February 20th. And we're making a note that that's subject to change based on when we hear from the city of when the public hearing will actually be scheduled. So we need to align with probably having a special meeting of the East Norwalk Neighborhood Association at that time. And I would say that it is our desire to hopefully be able to have a meeting in person so that we can better collaborate on preparing as a community to speak at the public hearing and for folks to submit their comments, concerns, questions, and suggestions. Okay, so just for the sake of making sure that everyone is on the same page, I want to go over a few facts that we should keep in mind. We had sent out an email, I guess it was about a week or so ago, to probably 700-800, I forget how many people were in that distribution, but hundreds and hundreds of emails where we had asked folks to watch a video review of this Cemetery Street application that was made at Planning and Zoning, and to watch it from beginning to end. It was about 40 minutes, and to then provide ENNA with your feedback on it, and comments, concerns, questions, suggestions, observations. And I do want to say, we only heard from about a dozen or so folks, literally, via email. Many people were posting on social media. So I do want to say that if you're providing feedback, it's great to communicate and interact with one another on social media, but it doesn't really make its way through to public comment, either for what you intend to send to the city or necessarily for what ENNA folks are going to see and consider as we go to try to represent you. So just to, again, manage expectations and keep everyone kind of realistic about this, we've heard from a lot of people that, there's no way that this development should go through. It's too big. We don't want it. It's the wrong location. It's too many apartments, etc. So we want to remind people, I hate to say it this way, but stopping this type of development in East Norwalk, that ship has really already sailed from 2 points of view. One, the area was designated a transit-oriented development zone, primarily because of our train station. And it was designated in order to actually spur larger scale development to happen in this around the transit hubs like the train stations. And those final approvals, after several years of meetings and debates and refinements and public hearings and protests, etc., were reviewed and approved back in 2020 and 21. And they had all required reviews done, not just through the city of Norwalk, but through the state agencies, the Western Connecticut government, etc. Council of Governments, I'm sorry. Now, within the East Norwalk transit-oriented development zone, after that was authorized, Planning and Zoning decided to create a village district specific to East Avenue and called it the East Avenue Village Transit Zone. And it was specific to East Avenue from I-95 exits, the bridge, all the way to Cemetery Street. And that was ultimately then refined with all the details of how someone could comply with putting in a new development application. And it was, the zone was actually created as what we now dub the EVTZ district. So you'll hear that tonight. And that was approved in January of last year. So the underlying regulations that dictate what can be developed in East Norwalk are a done deal. So it's not really going to be productive for people to say that we don't want this at all. As you're looking through the slides and getting information tonight, what we should be keeping in mind is that that type of uphill battle is just an effort in futility. What we can be considering as you look at this is ways that we can mitigate what could be a tremendous impact, a negative impact on our community in terms of the density, the height, the traffic impact, the public amenities, etc. Within this district, the increased height of 3.5 stories and the density, meaning the population, the number of residential units, increased to 1 unit per every 825 square feet of the parcel lot. Within this district, that is allowed, one, by special permit review, which the Mill Pond Cemetery application is. It's being filed as a special permit. And B, it would have to contain within its proposal enough of what they call public amenity bonus points in order to maximize the height and density. And just simply said that really what that means is that if you put in enough amenities for the public, then you can actually rack up enough points where we'll allow you to go higher with the buildings to 3.5 stories, and will allow you to have more units or density within those units. The EVTZ zone does require in the regulations that there be a third party traffic review of any traffic study that's submitted with an application. The third party review consultants are I believe on call with the city, or they're selected at the time of the application. It's required to be done. The city selects the traffic consultant, but the applicant is required to pay the fees for that. Also in the EVTZ zone, something that we were happy to see and glad that stayed in there is that it also requires any application also requires an architectural design review, so that there's a third party made up of different members, including landscape architect, structural architect. I think there's a historical a review person on there. There's a number of people. And so this application will be subject to both of those. At this time, the third party traffic review just came back last week. They had a number of comments and concerns. The applicant has read those and replied to them. And so there could be a little bit back and forth on that. Unfortunately, it's already January something, January 16th, and we still don't have any architectural design review. So ENNA has expressed concern to Steve Kleppen at P&Z, and also to the P&Z Commission Chair, Lou Shulman, that they are hastily moving towards public hearing when these baseline documents haven't even been made available, not only to city staff, but they haven't been made available to the public. Okay, and then for the special permit application for itself, this is a refresher course. If it complies with the zoning regulations, then by law, the Planning and Zoning Commission that this comes before, they must review it. They can't take a look at something and say, we're opposed to it, we just don't like it. They actually have to take it under consideration and do a full review of it. They have to schedule at least one public hearing. They can actually schedule more based on either additional information or the volume of people that are looking to speak and be heard. Or if the public hearing raises enough questions or suggestions or concerns that the applicant would then have to go back and do revisions and come forward again. It's a discretion then of the zoning chair whether or not then to hold the public hearing open for additional comments. However, one of the things that protects us with special permits is that the Planning Commission, they must take into consideration 13 standards as they evaluate the impact of the application on the community. When you have just a regular zoning application, what we call over the counter, and it's not a special permit, there's nothing that requires the Planning Commission to look at anything regarding things that could be objectionable, like traffic, noise, air pollution, light pollution, visual pollution, impact on city infrastructure and city services, etc. And I'm going to talk about the 13 standards in just a minute. And then even if the zoning commission reviews those 13 standards and they have concerns about the impact with some or all of them, it doesn't mean that the application will be denied. It simply means that the commission can then consider imposing conditions that would allow the permit to be granted, even though it otherwise would be objectionable. So maybe an example of that is, this would be objectionable because the impact on traffic is going to create some sort of a dangerous intersection, and you can't really, there's a bad sight line. Well, they could impose a condition that says that you'd have to modify that particular aspect of how you're managing traffic on and off your site. And the applicant would be required to do that in order to get their permit approved. Another example, a common example of conditions is buffering of noise and visual aspect of a development, especially a large one, between that parcel and abutting residential neighborhoods or residences that can see it. And a common condition for a zoning commission to impose would be that they have to buffer either with natural materials like trees and shrubs. They may impose a condition that there has to be a fence. They could impose conditions on exactly where trash and recycling happens, and also can impose conditions on how they're managing mechanicals like HVAC equipment and generators and air blowers and rooftop units, etc. Just as some examples there. Okay, so I know this is a little hard to read, and we can spend a little bit of time on this, and it's one of the things that we post all the time in our emails to residents. These are the actual standards that the zoning commission will be looking at in terms of this application. I'm just going to read them quickly so you have them in your head, and then we can speak about which ones we think are important to this application once I get through all the slides. So the first one seems pretty obvious, which is the density of use and the bulk of the buildings. So they have to take that into consideration. And when they go to do that, they're going to actually compare that against what's regulated and allowed in the zone and what is allowed under special permit with these bonus points. They are required to look at whether or not this allows for stable traffic flow so that it doesn't adversely affect pedestrian or vehicular safety. It won't conflict with a pattern of highway circulation or lead to a lower level of service in terms of how quickly cars move through traffic intersections, for example. This is the one where you guys will recall with every traffic study, it's our common joke that there's never been an application that came through where the developers, traffic experts didn't contend that there was no significant impact. And very often they contend that traffic would be improved under all the wonderful things that they're doing. They'll look at the availability of mass transit. Of course, that's very important because these regulations were designed as part of transit-oriented development. And so they'll make sure that it complies with the availability and then to make sure that there's some degree of walkability that complies with the city standards. They have to take into account the availability and compatibility of utilities that will service it. Another important one here that we highlight is looking at the adverse impact from noise, odor, fumes, dust, and artificial lighting. Again, those are types of things that that people might think could actually just shut down an application altogether, but almost all of these can have strict conditions imposed on them that would actually mitigate the impact. The signs and of size and design that are in harmony with the neighborhood, so that they're not more visual pollution or oversized. The adequacy of the yards and open space, screening and buffering. This one should actually be highlighted. They'll look at the impact on neighborhood properties as compared to uses and structures that were permitted as of right. This one is important because at the public hearing and presentations from the applicants, you'll see that they will often compare what they're proposing to a prior use, which was the bank in this case, or to other uses that could be there tomorrow as of right. And what they'll be looking to do is to say, what we're proposing is better than either what's there now or what could go there tomorrow. The argument of what could go there tomorrow, we believe, is kind of a moot point, and it's not really relevant because the commission should only be considering applications that come before us. The fact that something could be applied down the road is meaningless, especially if it's something that's not likely to ever, materialize. They'll also look at the existing land use in the area in terms of, harmony of what's going on, or is it overdevelopment in terms of a particular type of use? They take into account the proximity of community facilities that are available, especially for a residential development. And then finally, or almost finally, they have to look and make sure that it complies with the official plan of conservation and development for the city. And typically what happens there is they'll go back, staff and the applicants will go back and cherry pick different sections of the POCD and say, we comply with this, this, and this. They're not going to point out anything that it doesn't comply with. The thing to keep in mind with the POCD is this is one of the areas that we're probably going to need some help, if somebody could volunteer to help, to take a look at the POCD stipulations and see if this really complies with what the goal is of development. In some cases, we know that there's verbiage in the POCD that was actually incorporated in there, knowing that TOD was coming to East Norwalk. So there's some references in the POCD that look like they were almost written for this development and others like it that are going to come along East Avenue. They do have to consider the conservation of wetlands, watercourses, and other ecological valuable lands. This is one that we really need to hone in on. The applicant is basically, for all intent and purposes, they're ignoring this. And unfortunately, wetlands, inland wetlands, are under the purview of our city's conservation officer. And I think I told you guys at a meeting or two ago that she actually deemed this to be a minor application. And it didn't even go before the Conservation Commission, and they didn't hold a public hearing on it. And just to explain quickly, she did that because they can only look at inland wetlands. They can't look at tidal wetlands, which is what most of Mill Pond is. And because it was only a little sliver of wetlands, and it appears that the applicant complied with meeting the setback of their parcel and their buildings from the inland wetland, and I think they made it by just 12 inches, literally. I'll talk about that too. That her hands were tied by state regulation in terms of what she could look at. The disappointing thing here is that we haven't had as much success dealing with the state of Connecticut's Department of Environmental Protection in terms of looking at what the real impact is going to be on Mill Pond. Their primary concern when they're looking at those types of tidal wetlands and the wildlife there is the protection of endangered species and species that are on what they call, I believe they call it the watch list. So we have a very comprehensive list that residents have provided for us of all the types of birds and animals that are there. And we're going to be looking to see if we can have a professional review those and give a professional opinion on what's there and what maybe needs to be on the watch list, or something that the DEP isn't aware that is at that parcel. That's probably an uphill battle. Okay, and then the two other things they have to, the commission has to confirm that there's no existing violations that exist on the property. To the best of our knowledge, there's nothing that exists or now is a violation. And then as a part of the application, we know that the applicant has to be able to provide proof that there aren't any property taxes in the arrears for the parcel as they're applying for it. Okay, I wanted to just bring up some of the slides that hopefully folks have been looking at in the documents that we've sent out. And don't be scared by these professional drawings here. We know that there's a lot of detail on here. We've actually had some people who are reviewing this detail and pointing out some things to us. So if you are inclined to spend a little time with a cup of coffee looking at these things, and you come up with a question or a concern or something you just don't understand, please shoot us an email, because it may have been also something that we've missed as well. What I'm showing you here is what they're calling the traffic, the updated traffic plan. This is for the site itself. Where I've highlighted here, this is my highlighting here. This is Cemetery Street, going from East Avenue and then coming around to Gregory Boulevard, coming to the right. There used to be 3 curb cuts here for the bank. Actually, it may have been 4, I'm not sure. But what the applicant is proposing is that they make this a safer roadway and safer for vehicular traffic by cutting it back to just 1 curb cut over here, which starts right at the bend of Gregory Boulevard. Why they are really doing that actually is because in order to maximize the amount of buildings and residential units, they need to get these buildings here as close to the street as possible and as far left as possible. And so this is the gap here between the major building and the underground parking and public amenities, and another smaller building here, which at first was promised to us by Mike Descala, the owner of this property and the developer. He originally had promised that he would relocate Wells Fargo Bank over here, and it would be a small a bank for the community, but he ultimately reneged on that. The other reason why they are doing a design here to kind of shove as much in here to the left and then have a smaller building to the right is you may notice some of these lines here going diagonal. There's actually a huge discharge pipe for stormwater that runs under their property that the city has an easement for. And this is where it runs through. And so had the developer wanted to do a building that actually went over that, or any part of the amenities, because the easement is there, if the city ever had to get access to maintain that major pipe, they would have to, obviously have access through the building or actually do possibly demolition to get there. So this is more, the reason this is separated really has more to do with that pipe than it does to where they want to have the egress. It doesn't really make sense to have that on a bend, and certainly not to have it there when you're looking at, I'll explain in a minute what's over here, but the retail mixed-use function of the parcel is here to the left. This again, and this is East Avenue going south, kind of what we call Little East Avenue going south as you move beyond the cemetery, which is up here, and you travel down beyond Sweet Ashley's coming down to Seaview. So everyone has their bearings. And I know there's stuff in chat and people may have their hands raised, but if I can, unless it's something urgent, Charles, that you see there, I'm just going to keep going. Okay. And then we can always come back to a slide.
Nothing yet.
Okay. Okay. So in alternative one, what they're proposing is that, well, in both alternatives, they're proposing taking away the double lane on Cemetery. Most of you know that Cemetery is split at 2 lanes. One lane continues left to go, onto 136, heading back towards Highway. The other lane continues going to the east and then veers off to the right going to the beach. What the city is proposing is that the city would like to see this change to a single lane of traffic, include some parking spaces here along the frontage of where the buildings come up to the sidewalk, the new buildings, put in a wider sidewalk there, but also put in a 5-foot wide bike lane. They would also take some of the current lane and go ahead and widen the sidewalk so that there would be a safer walking path around the cemetery. Now, I want to make 2 points on this. It's not the applicant actually applying to make those changes on Route 136, which is actually a state highway. It's the city. And what the applicant is telling the commission is that the city had this in their plans to do anyway, to make improvements there. But the fact of the matter is we have no record of that. We only have a record of Steve Kleppen occasionally mentioning that engineers were looking at a way to improve the intersection over here so that there were better opportunities for pedestrian crossings. None of us were made aware of any consideration of taking away the lane on Cemetery Street. And we have heard from a number of residents who this is a primary concern for in terms of congestion, gridlock, the ability for ambulances, fire trucks, first responders to get through there heading towards the beach, and certainly what it would do, you know, at boat shows, dog shows, fireworks, concerts, etc. Okay, so hopefully everybody understands that. So this turns to 1 lane. There are some painted crosswalks that are added in, which are always a good thing. We under the TOD plan and walk bridge and everything, we expect for this work would have been done anyway. There is a turning radius here, the way that they're going to modify the traffic island that would allow tractor trailers to be able to make that turn. And rather than destroying a traffic island, there'd be some part of it that would be gravel or pavement that a truck could actually ride up over. That requires more of an explanation that I don't have time for tonight. And then the other thing that happens is that in Gregory Boulevard going north, as it comes around back up to 136, would become a single lane and doesn't split again until you get beyond, I think, where Giant Laundry is. And then Steve Kleppen is also proposing that at Rogers Square, which normally now the traffic flow comes from Gregory and goes counterclockwise and comes out to Gregory Boulevard and East Avenue, he wants to change that to go clockwise and come out and go around somewhere there. Not really clear on what that's all about. And I'm not sure what it does to Emerson Street either. We can take a look at that later. Okay, so that was alternative 1 that they threw out there in terms of managing traffic here. Alternative 2, which I'm sorry, it's a little smudgy. These are their drawings, not mine. But what is mine here is this big red circle. So in addition to the single lane coming down Cemetery, and the improvements that would have crosswalks at the traffic islands. There'd be a significant change to the traffic island over here at Gregory, and the cars that would be exiting, coming out of the Mill Pond development, would be basically looking to cut across and then, cut across and then continue uninterrupted on what the single lane is on Gregory. Now, what that means is that the current yield at this intersection is actually a forced yield at people on Cemetery Street, correct? I think everybody knows that. As you're coming along Cemetery and you want to take a left and then go north on 136, there's a yield here at the little island so that you yield to all the cars coming from Gregory Boulevard. And then you proceed normally into the left lane and then cut over if you need to Emerson or to 136. Under this plan, they changed this intersection. You could see the modification for the crosswalk. It's kind of hard to tell the traffic island here. But what would happen is that you'd come up Gregory Boulevard, it would stay as one lane, and the yield of traffic would now be on Gregory Boulevard. So every car going north on Gregory Boulevard would yield and make sure there's no cars coming from Cemetery before it would proceed. It's not a merge. And the reason I mention that is anyone who gets on the highway going south in the morning, or a lot of highway intersections in Connecticut, you'll see that there's a pretty poor understanding among drivers of the big difference between yield and merge. So that's definitely a concern in terms of safety and potential accidents, but also because we expect that the yield would be there. It wouldn't be there periodically, it would be a permanent yield. And so this would also create a serious issue at fireworks, weekend, beach traffic in season, car shows, concerts, dog shows, etc. And depending on the flow of traffic, that's the cut through going to Westport and back out to the highway coming from Van Zandt. We're not quite sure yet what the impact could be just even on morning commute traffic there. Okay, and then here's an aerial overview. Basically, they're just showing you here. Where I'm circling with my cursor is the bank parcel. This is Cemetery Street. They're showing now the radius of the turns and where the crosswalks would be. They've highlighted the church driveway there because this could potentially be impacted. It becomes one lane on Gregory going north. They would reverse the traffic on coming out of going into Rogers Square and then proceeding out back to Emerson, I think, because one of the questions I have, and I'm sorry I didn't get this answered, and maybe someone who's on this meeting tonight can answer this. I'm not sure if Emerson actually becomes a dead end over here. I'm not clear how that's actually going to work when under this alternative too. What I can tell you is the latest communication between the traffic engineers, the third party, and city staff is that they are leaning towards that second alternative, where this would be completely redesigned and the yield would be on Gregory. Okay, so I can stop right now if you want and take some questions just on that. No comments at this point. If you have a question on what you saw that you're not clear on, I can. And if not, we're going to get into some of the drawings just so that you can see the latest renditions that were presented to the city. Okay. Hopefully most of you watched the 44-minute video and you would have seen virtually all of this in there, but I think it's worth a quick review now.
Okay, Diane, in the chat, just to back up a little bit about the Gregory Boulevard yield, wouldn't it be better to have a flashing yellow light there?
I think it would be a possibility because it would allow the traffic then to just, go on caution. I'm not sure how that would work though. In terms of being able for Gregory Boulevard to, be able to understand if there's someone turning left from Cemetery. I think that's what you're talking about, right? A flashing light. Oh, a flashing light for both. You're saying for both, right?
Yes.
Okay. I guess that's a possibility. I would have to ask that question because normally where there's a flashing yellow light, I think people are as confused by that as they are by merge and yield or four-way stops. But it's probably a good question that we should add to the list that we'll build under traffic. Good question. And I don't believe that came up. I know that there's a stop bar that would have to be, coming out of, obviously coming out of this parcel. So people understand that they have to stop. But I think, from my perspective, without having real close-up detail on this and actual images, it's hard to tell exactly what that sight line would be. Can someone actually safely turn out of that driveway?
Okay, another question is, where is the sidewalk along their parcel?
Okay, so if I go, let me see if I can go back to, can I zoom in on this? I can tell you, like, there's basically no setback. I mean, there's like very little setback. So I think it's in here. I'm not sure. It's hard to discern between the dashes here. But there is sidewalk that's in front and then coming down the side as well. Let me go back to the one before that. It literally comes right up to like the front stoops. Okay, we will add that to the list of questions to be able to get a better depiction of that. Sorry, folks.
Okay, also in the chat, can you talk about the parking on East Avenue and also in front of the parcel?
Okay, so on in front of the parcel, they're looking to do on-street parking. That would be I've read 5 spaces, and then I've read like 8 spaces. It would be cut in a little bit so that I think it's a bump in, so that there would be a buffer for a bike lane as well. But it wouldn't be anything angled. It would be parallel parking. And the intention, I think, that it would be open parking for people that were visiting whatever the retail is there. Because most of us contend that there's not enough parking for this facility itself. We expect that it would be overflow parking simply for residents and their guests, but it would be along here on the frontage. They did mention that they were considering working with the city to have parking going northbound on East Avenue across from Sweet Ashley's. And I'm not sure how much sense that makes, because once you get beyond the first few parcels there, that road actually becomes one way. East Avenue turns one way, then going down to Seaview. And there is already parking alongside of East Avenue here in front of, there's a few spaces in front of Sweet Ashley's. So that's what we know so far. No one has confirmed or denied how the parking is going to be controlled in front of there. But my suspicion is that because the Norwalk Parking Authority has a huge amount of control over parking within the city, that it may fall to them for regulation and also enforcement. Because they'll want to guard, because of the train station, they'll want to guard against, have no parking, at certain hours, so that commuters aren't just parking there for free and then hopping, over to the train station and taking the train. But that's one of many questions that we have regarding the traffic. If it's in the data, I haven't hit it yet in the review. Of course, they give you, 50 or 60 pages of the stuff to go through. And the actual third-party review only came on Thursday and then was posted on Friday. So we'll continue looking at that. We've asked repeatedly for people to help us as well. So if there's anyone on this call who can help us to get another set of eyes on traffic and architecture and design and layout and amenities, environmental stuff, all the big ones. We're still looking for people to help. I'll just say help. I won't even say volunteer. I think that maybe sounds too much of a commitment, but if there's anyone that can help, or if you know professionals that you can refer us to, we really need some help with that. Okay, should I go on, Charles, or for now, or?
There's just one other question in the chat. Is this parcel in a flood zone?
It is. So I'm going to come up to that in a minute, because it is the one area that the DEEP has some serious concerns over, especially because of the density of the residential units here. And I may even have a little clip of what they wrote to the city on that. There's an opportunity, though, I think, for this applicant to go to FEMA and ask for some modifications regarding how they view this as a flood zone. And I think it has to do with how specifically they have this setback. You see how close to the road this is? But what they've done is they've pushed everything right on top of cemetery. And part of the reason why they had to do that is they had to comply with setbacks from the inland wetlands, but also because of the flooding that happens in the back parking lot. But I think there's an opportunity for them to go back and get a different designation from FEMA based on a rule that has to do with, don't ask me how they come up with this, but it has to do with having residential at greater than 14 feet above whatever that line is. And most people know that when you're standing at Cemetery Street, it's a pretty steep topography, actually, going from the top, the northwest corner here, looking down. And I'm going to show you some images from the back parking lot as well, so that you'll see. But I'm glad someone raised that question, because if folks haven't been in tune yet with the South Norwalk Resiliency Study, where the consultants provided some visuals of sea level rising approximately 20 inches by the year 2050, that would definitely have an impact on a parcel like this. The difference is how they look at impact between someone's car getting flooded or versus someone kind of life and limb and residential property getting impacted. You guys, I'm sorry that sometimes I'm just really vague with this stuff. The reason is because on almost any one of these individual topics, we can spend an entire evening or forum just talking on that. So I just try to touch on the highlights, and then we can hone in on specifics of what everyone needs to know. And the more you send that stuff into us, the more that we can get these questions out to the expert and get them answered. We do try to get the answers in writing as well, which helps versus, just having conversations with them. We like to get it in writing. Okay, this is, oops. Okay, this is a rendition of, these drawings all come from their documents, by the way. This is one of the views. Hang on one second. I'm just trying to fix my screen here. Okay. This is one of the views. If you're looking at this parcel from the cemetery, you're looking directly at the frontage of that main building. the building that goes from East Avenue at Sweet Ashley's, and then stops before you hit the bend here at Gregory and you get the other little building. So this building here on the right is the one that they're justifying as retail space. This is interesting because it's an interesting space here for retail, considering this is supposed to be mixed use. And the idea for mixed use originally, when TOD and EVTZ were getting approved, was that you would have mixed use activated ground floor all across the ground floor of a development of this size. Out of nowhere, right before EVTZ was about to go for approval, Steve Kleppen came back with a recommendation that he said would be much better for the developers if you could change the requirement to have retail and commercial use at either end of a parcel that's on a corner, and therefore you would allow more residential units by having residential units on the ground floor. And I just want to say this, I'm not being facetious, but for several weeks, none of us could figure out why he was doing that. It didn't make sense, even though he mentioned that he was working with developers on what they felt would make more sense. And now, not understanding it and then seeing this development come through, now we understand exactly why that change was made. And at the time, we thought it was fairly innocuous and really didn't put up as big a fight as we probably should have, because now this is the result of it. This is kind of a behemoth retail structure here. You could see in other renditions that this is literally all glass. So hardly Nantucket, more industrial, especially with these pilasters. Oops, sorry guys, coming all the way down, 3 stories coming down to the street. And so then you'll see that these are residential units. Even though there's some setback in between these buildings that they've dubbed, well, this is retail, they've dubbed these, I think they call them the 3 sisters, and then the mansion. But you'll see that there's some setback here, and you would almost think that there's a separation in the buildings. And this would be an ideal opportunity to have something that would be created that would be a walkway through into more mixed use, and to be able to see through to and get to the mill pond. But this is not open, it's just a minor setback from the frontage on the other buildings. They've also, in their latest plan, we have this on the videotape, is them saying that they reapplied, and when they reapplied and resubmitted this application, that they were looking to further improve the roof lines in terms of the architectural appeal, and also to mitigate the height. Not sure where that's coming from, because they didn't elaborate on that, and we're not seeing it in any of the new drawings. Okay, so this is from a cemetery street. And then thanks, Charles, to this, he kind of blew this up. This is another one of the depictions that came from their documents with the city. It just shows the depth. You can see that there's underground parking here, but it really highlights the fact that this plan was put together basically with a single mandate. And the mandate was get as many residential units in there as you can, and just do retail that's going to satisfy the mixed use requirement of a special permit plan in here. And one of the things also, again, thanks Charles for pointing this out, sometimes we get so hung up on talking about the number of residential units that we forget to actually take a look at how many bedrooms it is. And a lot of times that equates to not only the number of people that you can expect to either live there or be, visiting and staying there, but also is really supposed to actually impact the number of parking spaces. For example, before I leave the slide, I'll just mention this. In Westport, in their zones that allow for this amount of density, they require 1.5 parking spaces per 1-bedroom unit. In Norwalk, we require 1.2 parking spaces per residential unit, no matter the size of it. In Westport, if you have 2 or more bedrooms, then you have to have 2 parking spaces per those units. So this is really important here because we contend that the city and the developer, even using the guidelines that they believe they're entitled to use, have woefully underestimated the amount of parking that an apartment complex of this size is going to require. Okay, and now here is what we've all been waiting for and begging for since August, actually, is to get some actual drawings that are renditions of what this structure is actually going to look like. I'll step back here and just remind you that our zoning commission chair and the commissioners and staff made a decision early on that this development was not large enough or impactful enough in the community to require the developers to prepare a 3D replica for us. I think that's really unfortunate because this is not, a mom and pop developer looking to put up a, small mixed use development. These are developers with millions and millions and millions of dollars at their disposal, that they would have to provide those types of visuals in other communities. So unfortunately, we don't have that. ENNA is looking, actually this today, looking to contract with a professional who actually does 3D modeling. And so we're looking to see if we can get something done because most of us are visual and we really need to see things to scale for what they're going to be versus, just these types of pictures. If we're successful with that, by the way, depending on how much it costs, ENNA is also going to take a look at seeing if we can contract with this person or others that would do 3D rendering for us of a complete build out of East Avenue. You may recall when we were going through the TOD public hearings that we repeatedly asked for staff to provide us what East Avenue would look like if every single available parcel was fully built out to the TOD specs. And they weren't inclined to do that because they felt that that's unlikely to happen. But just as our friends over in Saugatuck contend with the woes they have over there with development, the fact that it's not likely to materialize with applications doesn't mean that it can't. And it's only fair to the public that we be able to visually see a depiction of what could happen to our community. Okay, so this is an aerial view from the west, looking down, say, from East Avenue, the side that where Sweet Ashley is, looking into the back of the buildings. This actually ends up being a rooftop terrace. And then there's parking at grade and then ultimately parking underground as well. You'll see that in pictures coming up. Over here on the left is what's proposed as public. This is one of the public amenities that they're getting bonus points for, to have public seating here. And beyond that point, though, is all public amenities for the tenants only. And I'll show you another picture of this, but this is a rooftop terrace with outdoor seating. And you may see here that there's actually a movie screen, outdoor movie screen. This is the back of the retail establishment. And in the latest documents provided by the applicants, they have already said that a portion, if not all of this public seating here might actually become covered seating that would be for the use of whoever this retail tenant is. And yes, as one of our great ENNA members pointed out, there's a distinct possibility that this type of structure here could contain one or more retail franchise fast food operations. Just want to throw that out there. This parking here, also want to note in terms of the landscaping they're showing, we've had one opinion already from an architect and a developer consultant that this type of mature trees are unlikely to be planted as mature, of course, because you're looking at 15, 20, 30 feet. It's very expensive to do. And if the notion is to do that, and maybe these are arborvitaes, I'm not sure what they're looking to depict there, it can take, a decade, depending on what these plantings are for them to get to the height. Not only do you see the movie screen here, the rooftop terrace, all of this is actually, if you go off the screen here, now you're starting to come down to where Mill Pond is, the pond itself. But these are all tenant windows, all facing out to all the properties on Mill Pond. And so you have windows, you have glare, you have lighting, etc. In here, you also have, there's going to be components that have tenant balconies as well. And somebody else has to help me with this. I'm not sure what this structure is in the lower right. I think they may be depicting where the back of the structure on East Avenue comes in. But I need to figure that one out.
The lower right is the existing building, and so is the parking there.
The existing building that's on East Avenue, the blue
Yes,
one?
correct.
The blue one.
The blue house.
Okay. Yeah, because I think the assumption there was that they weren't going to sell. So this is part of the plan. Okay, got it. And we'll see that again. I think there's another better version of that, but hopefully everybody has the lay of the land here. So think of Sweet Ashley's over here, and Cemetery Street is up here, and Mill Pond is over here. Okay. We're just at 8 o'clock, so I'm going to start flying through these. Okay, now this is another version looking at what they're calling the public seating as an amenity that they get bonus points. Again, you have to keep in mind that they're looking to do as inexpensive as possible and easy to put in amenities to rack up points that allow them to have 3.5 stories and one residential unit, or as many residential units as they can fit within those tiny setbacks. So this is access here coming across from East Avenue. You can notice here our question about, is this truly going to be public seating, or is it actually ultimately going to become what the retail tenant uses? If it does look like any part of it is for the retail tenant, the regular public are going to be reluctant to walk in there because you're going to think you have to buy something, or that you'd be trespassing on the retail property. It also doesn't look very particularly comfortable to me in terms of someone to sit, maybe eat their ice cream cone. There's nothing in front of you as a table for, put food down or your laptop or to have a game of cards. They are qualifying this as a bonus point that we call shaded seating, literally meaning shaded from, the sun. And there should be some elements protection, but even though these trees over here look like they would provide it, coming from the south, and maybe a little bit here, I don't know what this tree thing is. And certainly in the evening, there would be, a lot of sun coming through here. This also begins a public realm walkway that ultimately leads all the way around the parcel and back out to Gregory, but then leads to a walkway that goes down to Mill Pond. I'm checking this other angle over here, but it's hard to see. But at least from this angle, this is not mobility accessible here as well. And another thing to note when they do all these pretty renditions with, trees and landscaping and lighting and shadows, they don't depict any trash and recycling receptacles either. And this is also supposed to be the type of seating that they call powered seating, so that you can plug in and charge your phone and your devices as well. Right back here, there's another picture of it, but this is where you enter the part of the property that is private for the tenants, their own courtyard. Okay, so this is from another angle, from East Avenue looking in, and you can see this type of their rendition of what would be seating for people, I guess here on the grass as well. I'm not sure what this material is, or if this drains, or how this gets maintained. And I'm still not sure if any of this is accessible, but you can see it's just a very little sliver of the corner there, because once you get over here, I believe that this is then access that would not be in the public realm. So you wouldn't be able to walk back there, as far as I know. We can get that clarified too. And you can see the depiction here that they have now of these 30, 40-foot trees coming up from below that would be a buffer. It's interesting here because one of the main things that residents talked about is that when Mike DeScala first approached us and presented to us about doing a development there, people were very concerned with making sure that there was still an easement and public right-of-way to be able to view the pond. And it seems like what's happened here, at least at this level, is that, there's an attempt here in this public realm, like you wouldn't be able to see Mill Pond. So I'm not sure what the purpose of that is. It blocks it, and I think water view and access also are requirements of the DEEP. There are regulations around the city having to be able to ensure that there's public access for what they call water dependent uses. And we're going to talk about that in a slide or two. Okay, so now this is now within the tenants common area. And this is over to the right is where you would see the public seating area, but then everything else is fenced off here with this kind of open fence style. You have a little bit of green space here. I'll bring it up because everybody also brings it up about, is this where people, 100 people are going to be walking, 50 dogs out here? I'm not quite sure how green space and play space and dog space is going to work. But there's seating here, and then there's an outdoor movie screen. Presumably again for the tenants, and then some landscaping. And then as you move into the property and you come around to where the building then in the back jets out, there's a kind of a pergola covered outdoor seating area here for the residents. And we haven't been able to discern what type of activities can go on there. There is seating with tables, and we're not sure if that includes like barbecues and grills, or if there's a what do you call it? A fire pit in there. And then you can also notice that along the perimeter are these decorative, light bulb type lanterns that are popular now. Probably would be required to be LED, but I don't know if these meet lighting regulations within the city, because lighting has to be, kind of covered and facing downward, but this would certainly be visible from all of our friends who own and live on Mill Pond right now. Okay, and then here's a view coming from the other side of this, of the tenants covered terrace here, and then their access coming down to, you'll see in a minute that there's access that then goes down the steps and gradually steps down to bring you down to the lower grade of the Wells Fargo parcel. And a high level aerial overview. Again, Sweet Ashley's would be over here. So you're looking from East Avenue, an aerial overview. The middle lower is the, right here is the tenant space with that movie theater. Even if that's public, I'm not quite sure, what that's going to do to the community in terms of light, at night and noise, etc. And, even just people talking. We do know from people who live on Mill Pond that sound carries incredibly across that water. So just want to point out this view. What you see here on the sidewalk is the sidewalk that is intended to be part of the wraparound for the public amenity, so that people would have access to come down and take a look at Mill Pond. Perhaps we have some famous photographers here, famous to us anyway, who take pictures of wildlife at the pond. And then this wraps around the building. And I'm going to talk about what you see this thing here jetting out next. And so Charles, and so then this angle here where I have the question mark, this is the Church Realty building then, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. I'm assuming most of this stuff is to scale, and that's actually exactly where it comes out into this parking. I think we have to clarify what that parking is there, though. Whose that is. Okay, so the issues here, the ENNA notes are of course the sound reverberation coming, from and bouncing off and going back out to the pond, not just for the disruption to the wildlife that's there, but obviously to the residents at Mill Pond. We have to take a look at the bird and wildlife and waterfowl access, coming from the north. The Wells Fargo Bank, as you know, is a fairly low structure on that parcel. And, we don't know what the flight path is of, birds that would be coming in from the north that go to land in the pond. Everyone so far has pointed this out to us, and we don't disagree with you, that no matter how you look at this parcel, access for the public into the parcel is going to feel like you're trespassing. Not unlike you may do in some of the parcels in South Norwalk, the way people felt about Waypoint over on West Avenue, in terms of access to Sedona and Barcelona and Colony Pizza. There's nothing that really indicates that that's within the public realm in there. What you're seeing here is really important to point out, because in order to comply with access that complies with the DEP regulation for water dependent use, the developer came up with a notion that they would provide a permanent easement for the city, which, by the way, we're going to have a lawyer look into, because we believe there's already an easement there, so they wouldn't be doing us any favor. But a permanent easement that then would allow the city to potentially build this overlook that would actually overhang. It would come on the portion that's not the wetlands, come on that little sliver of land that belongs to the city, and then it would kind of zigzag and be an overlook standing point for people to enjoy the Mill Pond and take photos and just enjoy the wildlife there, and then continue over. I think they're also talking about making city-owned property at the end of Fenwick, to kind of advertise that as a driving cut through and a walking and biking cut through to get to this from the other angle. The point of the matter is that jetting out into Mill Pond here, once you get to the point of the water, there is a certain amount of purview then from the DEP in terms of what can happen there, because there are nesting birds there, and is also this is also a tidal inland or wetland, and so there's flooding, etc. And just the impact on the ecology there would be something that it's our understanding from our source at the DEP was that even if the city was inclined to do this or could do it, that it wouldn't be allowed to be built. That's number one. Number two, the developer has already stated publicly that this would be something that the city would look to do on their own with no design, funding, building, or maintenance on behalf of the developer. And that includes not being able to do this until after the developer structures are all built, which someone asked a great question at the last meetings where people could speak about how would that actually happen? It's just not, logistically, it's just not possible to be able to have access for the type of staging and construction materials and everything else that you would need in order to build that. So one resident actually termed this or dubbed this the pipe dream. And we don't want people to be kind of enamored of all of this, thinking, wow, we're going to get this beautiful overlook pier into Mill Pond. They were also talking about like kayak launches and other less passive type of activities. And this is a look coming in from where I showed you from the upper level, where there's a staircase that then comes down from either side of those sidewalks, the public one and the private one. And this actually comes down. And as you know, like I said before, that parcel actually drops down a fair amount before you get to the level of Mill Pond. And this would be where you would then, kind of take a right and go out into this rendition of the overlook that would go into Mill Pond. Again, highly unlikely ever to happen. Maybe something smaller, over here that would be closer inland and just for like maybe one or two people to stand on looking over into the water. Okay, no way are you going to see this. Let me see if I can zoom in on some of it though. And I can, but then it gets blurry. Oh goodness. Okay, I will get this out in an email, but what this is remember in the beginning I talked about the bonus amenity points, that there's a whole series of what the city came up with the developers, by the way, not just these developers, but working with developers. The city finalized a list of possible public amenities that are kind of like a menu that they can choose from in order to rack up points to get the maximum density. And that's why it's called the East Avenue Village Transit Zone Bonus Points Chart. And what this developer has done is they've picked several of these that allowed them to get to a total number of points that allow them to do the 77 units and 3.5 stories. Things like outdoor pedestrian plaza, powered seating. They have a small little section that they're calling a rain garden, another section that's a butterfly pollinator pathway, shaded seating, etc. And so that's how they came up. I'm sorry that I can't actually get this visible. I'll email it out to folks because this is really important. But that's how they came up with rigging the amount of points that they need to get all that density. Most people would argue, and we did argue when the city was putting together this list of amenities, when we did a survey of people to say, which of these amenities that the city is looking to allow, or any combination of them, would you support and would be enough for you to support 3.5 stories and maximum density. And when people went through the list and did the analysis on this, the respondents, I think it was 70 or 80% of the respondents that we had come back said that there was no combination of these types of amenities I'm sorry, you can't read them here, but they're really like, most of them are either like the price of entry, things like, um, being, ecological and solar panels and pervious pavement, etc. All those things really should be the price of entry in terms of allowing this type of density. And people, when they looked at this, said, you can't come up with any combination of these types of amenities that would make this acceptable in our little East Norwalk Center. Okay, so one of the things that we looked at was trying to figure out how we went from a design that we didn't really have a picture of, but we had a verbal design from Mike DeScala, who owned the property and still owns it, that he was going to look to develop the parcel to be in good taste, in harmony with the neighborhood, to a reasonable scale, nothing monstrous. Do a couple of buildings, build a new little building for the bank so that we still have that amenity here. And the promise was to do an architectural style that would really be respectful of East Norwalk. And his description was, maritime, nautical, New England, Nantucket style. And then fast forward to begging to get examples of what they, even just rough renditions of what they were looking to do, and really not being able to get that. And then finally, basically what you see before you is what they applied for. And so when we ask people, is this what you envisioned when Mike DeScala and then Spinnaker actually met with or presented to ENNA, is this what you had in mind? Overwhelmingly, the response is not even close. So we kind of concluded that what ended up happening is that instead of Mike DeScala and Clay Fowler of Spinnaker going to their architect of choice, Bruce Beinfeld Architects, and saying, we'd like you to look at this parcel and design something in harmony with the neighborhood, in keeping with the architecture that's more of a maritime seaside little village, something Nantucket, very coastal, nautical, to scale, etc. And stick within the guidelines of what TOD allows us to do, but not, overdo it. Because the community is very concerned about this, and they expressed serious concerns that, a monstrous application could be coming. But instead, what happened as soon as we saw these drawings is reasonable people certainly could reach a conclusion that the directive was really to design something for greed. And I know some people have their backup over that term, and I just want to explain it quickly. No one that we know of, and certainly not the ENNA board of directors and ENNA volunteers and the residents that we speak to, are opposed to improving East Norwalk. Almost everyone agrees we're kind of a diamond in the rough. It needs to be kind of beautified. We do need some new development. We need some amenities. We need mixed use. We need more walkability, etc. And no one that, or almost no one, I should say, is not respectful of property owners' rights and the rights of developers to make a decent profit. But when you look at a development like this, the conclusion is that the actual design, maximizing everything out, is really for greed and not for profit. One of the two developers we know was even quoted as saying in another development he did that, yes, he could make a a profit, doing a lower scale, more acceptable development. But it's not the profit level that he wants to make. And so this is where we kind of fall into this debate about, yes, of course, they should make a profit. They should make a reasonable profit. They should make a fair profit and something that allows them to continue to invest. But this is not it. And what you see is this plan obviously developed behind closed doors. I'll remind everyone that the public isn't privy to any plans until a developer actually files the application. But months before that, sometimes years, but months certainly, developers are working behind closed doors with city staff, developing and really putting in the finite details of how this development is going to look. And so this is where now we figured out the reason for why Steve Kleppen had suddenly modified the regulations to allow the residential on the ground floor. But importantly, there were also changes that were made that they removed the requirement for the public amenity realms to really be in the front setback and not to be hidden by the public, unless it was like a public realm that went in between a building. I think they were calling it like an arcade. Like you would walk in between two buildings and there would be shops on that level and seating and maybe dining. And then the actual setbacks themselves were reduced. And now we can see why. And this development not only takes advantage of that, but they basically, when you look at those drawings and you look at the relationship to East Avenue, Cemetery Street, and Gregory Boulevard, they have taken advantage to the inch of falling just within inches of the required setbacks. So the goal, again, in greed, is to maximize every square inch of the parcel with no regard for the public, especially at the front where you have those looming buildings at the sidewalk. Actually, let me make a point on that. An interesting note, because we like to hear all sides of the people's opinions on this. Some people felt that by doing distinctly different styles on those 4 or 5 buildings, even though they're attached, actually helped to break it up. And visually, it's not as much of a monstrosity as it would be if it was all one style and all the same height and all the same materials. But then we've heard a couple of other opinions, and one actually from a professional who said that that kind of design actually makes it look not well thought out and disjointed. So interesting take on that, to how people view that. But I don't think anyone can argue that having 3.5-story buildings right at the setback at the street there is not what we had in mind and not what we were promised. The other design element in greed is situating it on the parcel specifically to avoid future issues with easements to the stormwater pipe. They had to maximize how they could do those structures for the pipe that's in between there. And also, we think that this has to do with a deed restriction from a gazillion years ago, that in perpetuity, that parcel is restricted to have retail only at the northwest corner, which is the corner that you see that big glass building across from Sweet Ashley's. And so in order to comply with that, that's what drove where the retail went. Instead of putting it at the ground level and dispersing it amongst the residential units on the ground floor. So it seemed more like, small boutiques and, maybe a coffee shop and maybe a professional office and maybe a salon. So again, they looked very closely at what they could do with the parcel and then said, how can we maximize based on these setbacks? And then another consideration of how they did the design is when they were looking at how many units they could put in and how much area of the entire parcel that they could use, they knew that if they went over a certain threshold, most importantly, 100,000 square feet or more, and a specific number of parking spaces or more, which I believe was 98, that would trigger an automatic requirement to go before the state of Connecticut DOT to what's called the Office of Standards of Traffic Administration, I think is the acronym. But in any event, OSTA is the agency within the DOT that does a review of anything they consider what's called a major traffic generator. You'll recall this from the Norton project and a number of other projects around Norwalk. Now, you kind of want to, as a developer, you want to see what you can do to avoid this type of review, because anything that they deem a major traffic generator, especially because it's on the Route 136, the state highway, then makes you have to comply with all kinds of design work to be able to accommodate traffic and to make sure that the level of service doesn't decrease, etc. And so in this case, you'll see that when they did the final workup of the gross square footage for these buildings, I'm not going to go through each one of these numbers, but the threshold at OSTA that would require this review and all the rest of the costs involved with it regarding this project is at 100,000 square feet. You can see that what ended up happening was there was enough manipulation done to bring this in at the DOT final number of 99,780 square feet. And they cut the parking on site down just enough, which is what we think precipitated the notion of on-street parking, so that the on-site parking also didn't become a requirement that would trigger a major traffic generator review. And then the DEEP and the Conservation Commission review of the tidal wetlands. The Conservation Commission here, which is in charge of inland wetlands, did a verification. I think we got a final report back from her that when they laid these buildings out, they deliberately laid them out so that they were within, I think it's a foot of where they would have to be that would have required another review. So they avoided that. And because the rest of it is tidal wetlands, they're able to review some of the more strenuous DEEP reviews as well. But ENNA is hoping to go back to the DEEP and find out what other recourse we have to try to see if they will intervene and try to mitigate the size of this development. The DEEP is very concerned with this, with the density, because of the rising sea levels and the proximity to Mill Pond. And they've expressed that back to P&Z staff and to the Planning Commission, and have advised them to consider that. Actually, they told them they have to consider that as part of their review. So we'll see how that's going. Okay, I know everybody is anxious to chat and talk. I just got a couple more. I wanted to say that in addition to our city staff and our appointed zoning commissioners not agreeing with us that we should have a 3D scale model to really understand what this is going to be, I think we should still go back and ask for that so that the burden is on the applicants who can well afford to do it, to do that. But another technique that we can ask for and ask them, the commission, to require is something called a balloon float height test. And this is where an applicant would be required to use these fairly big balloons and float them in the air, normally a number of them, not just a couple of them, that would show the high point of a development and then also the peak. So for example, this might be a roof line, a standard roof line, but then the peak point of that development as it goes along. These two examples I found are actually from one that was required at Disney, of all places, of a potential resort. And other, I know that other developments in Connecticut, residents have spoken up and demanded that these balloon tests be conducted as well. And I think that we should, just to be able to get an understanding. Of course, this one here on the right is not Mill Pond, but it could be. And this would be a good way for the residents on Mill Pond, but for all residents, to get a good idea of what these structures would look like, especially in the wintertime in the absence of foliage, to see just how high these buildings would be visible. I'll remind you again that the back of all those buildings are windows and lights and glass, etc. Not to mention the impact on lights and migratory birds, etc. Okay, so was hoping to be done by 8:30. It's actually 8:36 to be able to open up questions, comments at 8:30. The reason why we are having this meeting is to make sure that everyone is up to date. There's probably another 3 hours worth of detail that we can share in here. Our goal is to get you guys to, even if you make comments here tonight or questions, please, 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 if you can email them into us, so that we don't have to review this and we don't have a minute taker, for our meetings and stuff. So please email into us, info@eastnorwalk.org. And then this is going to be the basis for what we're already working on in terms of how we prepare for the public hearing, but also to be able to mobilize the community to be able to submit written comment for the public hearing, and also to speak at the public hearing, which the city is still 100% Zoom with planning and zoning. So you can do it via Zoom. I do want to say though, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but only having heard from 12 or 15 people sending comments in, and only having about 30 or 40 people on tonight's Zoom, albeit a holiday. I'm sorry about that. I have to say that we are going to need a couple hundred people for sure, and we're going to need letter writers, and we're probably going to need to get a petition going. And we do have funding to do lawn signs just to get some visibility in terms of the concern about this, especially for people who may not be aware of it. I want to thank Kelly and George, who I think are both on this meeting tonight. Thank you both very much. Those guys went out in the nasty weather a week or on Friday, and on this past Friday, and handed out 200 flyers to the streets right around Mill Pond and some of the abutting streets. And we did get some new signups from that, and people sending in some emails, so we appreciate that. Again, before I open it up, Charles, I'll just say, we're not going to stop a development from going in there. It's probably going to be a very significant development, if not exactly the one that you saw tonight and you've been seeing. And the best that we can hope for is consider all of this and make a compelling argument that the Planning and Zoning Commission consider your concerns and mitigate some of the impact this is going to have on our community with traffic, environmental, noise, pollution, the scale, the density, the strain on city services. You guys know the list. We'll have the list again in our upcoming email. Oops, we can leave this up here. I can go back to any of the screens. Okay, does anybody have their, Charles is still my co-pilot. Thank you very much.
Okay, there's lots of interesting comments in the chat. There are a few questions. One is, how are truck deliveries contemplated?
Excellent question. So we can anticipate a lot of those in terms of, you know, people moving in and out, but also truck deliveries, garbage delivery, recycling, pizza deliveries, Prime delivery, UPS deliveries. Those things are supposed to be taken into account in their traffic calculations based off of standards. There are national standards that traffic engineers use, and they're factored in based on the particular use of a structure and its location and how many residents, etc. So they factor those in. It's another example, though, where we think those standards, it's the ITE standards that they use, if you want to look that up, they generally underestimate those. And certainly those standards aren't really updated very frequently. So I don't know that any of those standards have taken in our new normal pandemic and post-pandemic world of not only, you know, Grubhub and food deliveries, but, you know, Amazon deliveries and lots of other things as well. You'll also notice in those drawings too, now that you mentioned trucks and everything, we also have to figure out just exactly what their plan is for snow removal. Because if it's not snow removal and it's snow pushing around and piling up, that's also going to impact their 35 at-grade parking spaces in the wintertime. And they only have limited, you know, underground parking. There's not enough parking for the people that will be there as far as we know. And so things like even snow in the winter are going to impact people parking. But you have to also consider probably in a complex that size, there's probably multiple trash and recycling pickups a week, not just one day a week. And then you have the staging for everything as well. Don't forget the construction of it. So there'll be trucks and construction staging and cars for all the employees. And so far they're saying that they believe that they can manage that all on site and do staging of all the equipment on site and just keep moving it as they continue building.
Diane, can you just review how to raise your hand to speak live?
Oh, sorry. Yep. So if you want to, if you're on the Zoom and you want to speak your hand, you can go into the there should be a little raise hand icon. Where the heck is it in here? Is it
it's under, let's see. I believe it's under chat. Let's see.
You know what? They seem to always move it around, or is it under apps? It's not under apps.
Oh, it's under reactions, and we do have a few people who did raise their hands.
Okay, yep. So you'll see a little icon in the menu there that says reactions, so you can raise your hand there, and Charles will recognize you. And if you're on the phone, you hit *9, and then we'll see that you're looking to unmute yourself.
Okay, first up will be Jesse. I'm asking to unmute.
Hi, I didn't realize my camera was off. Hi, everybody. I'm Jessie, and I want to first say thank you so very much, Diane, for all your work on this, and Charles for assisting. For those that don't realize it, Diane is a volunteer, so we owe you quite a lot. Thank you. I did write in the chat, and it's one of those things when you type, you don't want to sound rude. So I want to say it again, that I was asking, what can we do? I was so afraid as the meeting is going, longer, that folks would start logging off. You did mention a few things, but it seems to me that so many of us are just unhappy with this entire project. I too recognize that they're not going to scratch it and be done with it. But, if we're lucky, we can get some modifications and, God willing, come to some sort of a compromise that we could live with. What is our best call of action? Where do we go from here? I've emailed to no avail. I've been on so many of these meetings, like so many other people. What is the best thing that we can do, our next step, that would be the strongest and make the most impact? I hope I'm asking for other folks as well, and that whatever you tell us to do, we will in fact follow through.
Well, I think it's going to be, in the past, I think you've heard us. Thanks, Jesse, so much too. And I know what you wrote in, and it was a great effort in terms of sharing what real concerns are. I'll say too, I'll just remind people though, that when you write into to the Planning and Zoning Commission in care of Steve Kleppen, he must pass all that correspondence over to them, but they're not actually going to reply to you because once an application is before them, they're prohibited from discussing it outside of their zoning commission meetings, and then especially once a public hearing date is. But you should expect to have a reply from the planning and zoning director that maybe not only acknowledges your concerns, but answers some of the questions. Other times,
I've only ever twice, for the record, gotten one that said, "I've received your email. I will pass it along." Same exact sentence both times.
Yeah,
and months have gone by.
And that's kind of like the bare requirement, because they at least have to acknowledge that they received it. Other times what they'll do is, if you're sending in specific questions, a lot of times what the director will do is say, I will provide these questions to the applicant, and then I will post them. In fact, in the Norton application, they were actually posting the letters and emails that ENNA sent in, and then getting responses as well. So back to the original question, though, when you say the next thing, you often hear us talk about a toolkit of things that we need to be doing. And so it is a toolkit. It's not just one thing. And the next big thing I would say is that people need to understand what this application is. So I know it's like your eyes glaze over when you look at these documents, but it's really worthwhile to go onto the city website, to the link we provide all the time, take a look at the actual drawings and the documents, and watch the video, and then start communicating to everyone. And when you can, and if you're comfortable, copy ENNA on it. Send it into our elected district officials, Jen McMurray and John Pites. They will contend that they can't influence zoning, but they certainly represent this district, and they can speak up on behalf of their constituents on what our concerns are. Send it into the Planning and Zoning Commission in care of Steve Kleppen. I always encourage people to copy the mayor, because he appoints
all
these.
of that.
Yep. And you can make phone calls, but I do think it's better to do everything in writing. And then when the time comes, which is going to be very shortly, petitions can be powerful in terms of, oh, is this the same, 6 people from East Norwalk, or is this the labels and the NIMBY and the this and that. But once we start producing things that are, 200, 300, 400 signatures on a petition from residents, they tend to pay attention to that. One of the things you can do on a positive note, though, as you just mentioned, is really, this thing is going to get approved. The notion is that, how do we mitigate it? So we're really looking for the community, because this is not ENNA. You guys are ENNA. We're looking for the community to look at this and come back and say, well, maybe they could move this back. Maybe they could shift this over there. Maybe they could change that god-awful design, or take the glass out, or fix the seating. Anything like that, I think, is really going to show first the commission that, we're willing to come up with some ideas that could make this a little bit more palatable. But it'll also plant in their head to say, hey, why can't they do that? And a lot of times they'll say, you know what? ENNA is right. There's no reason why we can't, take a look at fixing this. So no one thing, but a toolkit. And I think people take advantage of what they can do. Some people love to write letters. Other people hate doing that. Some people are like, I'll walk around all the flyers you want, but I can't go to City Hall for a meeting. So it's to whatever people's abilities and desire are.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.
Okay, next up is Lou. Lou?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Lou.
Good evening, everyone. Diane, you're doing a terrific job again, like always. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lou. And we thank you for your advice and your guidance when you can too, our resident architect extraordinaire.
My name is Lou Garcia, and I'm a lifelong resident in East Norwalk for the past 50 years. I'm also an architect, and Diane had recommended that I take a look at the drawings that were done by Bindfield and see what could be done or not done with them. Unfortunately, I have a very busy practice, and I haven't really had much time to review the project. But the reason that I want to come on board tonight is because, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but being an architect and have done a lot of work for developers puts me in a position on the opposite side of how the developers thinking and also how the architects thinking. And I firmly believe that we're kind of too late for this project to be changed. I was a big proponent, and Diane probably remembers when the regulations were being written out and proposed to the community for approval and reviews. I was totally, I voiced my opinion and my knowledge that the density for that particular East Norwalk development project was going to be way too big for our neighborhood. Unfortunately, the regulations did pass, so now we have to deal with them. Mm-hmm. And that's what architects, that's what developers use as a basis for any kind of project that we do. And the fact of the matter is that if the developer and the architect meets all the requirements stated on those regulations, then there is little or no chance of changing it.
Right.
As an architect, I know for a fact that changing design, changing drawings is time consuming, it's expensive. And I don't think at this point the developer is going to listen to what we have to say as far as making it smaller or making it more nautical or making it a different design, because all that costs money. And I'm pretty sure Bindfield is not it's a very expensive architectural firm to work in the project. So I don't foresee that the developer is going to spend time and effort, money in changing the design or making a whole lot of changes for this project. I think that we kind of have to, at this point, kind of live with it. And the fact of the matter is this, is that I have also been, gone in front of the planning and zoning many times before. And in order for the zoning commission to reject the project, they have to have a pretty good sense that the developer and the architect have violated the requirements. They have to have, something that says, no, you do not comply with the regulations, therefore we're rejecting the project. Mm-hmm. At this point,
Lou, not to interrupt you, but I actually did go over this at the very beginning of the meeting to explain to people that the kind of the stopping of this project had sailed long ago because we couldn't modify what became the TOD regulations at that point. Of course, they're entitled to do to the maximum what they can. And I did explain that if it actually technically complies with the zoning regulations, that the zoning commission must approve it. The only leeway they have is in mitigating conditions because it's a special permit. So they can impose a number of conditions that will help to mitigate it. But I think people do. It is sad, but I do think people understand they have very little leeway in trying to modify anything. And in fact, they can't reject it. It's not possible. The legal battle, even if they had the political will to do it, the legal cost would be exorbitant.
For example, and just from what I just said, non-meeting regulations is that if everybody probably recalls, I was also a big opposition for the Winfield project, because that developer started out with proposing 17 units on that site. And to this day, I don't think that there was physically any way they could have done that. But the regulations that stated that they can only do 11 units for that particular site. So we fought that heavily, and there were many meetings that took place, and I kept telling them all the items that were incorrectly done. And in that case, the developer ended up having to build 11 units. And we can all see when we go by it today, that it's a very dense. There is very little or no green space, like they don't have it here. But it was done, and what happened in that case, and Diane can probably remember this, is that the developer actually sued the city because they rejected the idea of having, they kept coming down. They proposed 17, and then they went down to 15, and then down to 13, and eventually the city said no, you can only do 11, and they sued the city, and that's what happened here. If the planning and zoning decides that they're going to reject this project, the next phase is going to be that the developer is going to sue the city, and it's going to go to court. And unfortunately, again, if the court decides that the developer has met all the requirements and all the regulations, there is a very good chance that it's going to get overturned, and the developer will be able to build this thing.
Yeah, and you know what? Well, Lou, because no one wants costly litigation, and it usually ends up being. Well, when the city has had to settle, it's been, ridiculous. People will, recall the mosque and everything as well. But the fact of the matter is that there are commissioners who, so we no longer have a separate planning and zoning commission. We have one, and they are handpicked by the mayor, and they are basically, if you're following their review of this, there's no chance that they're going to reject it. They all are in favor of it. They've expressed their favor of it. They can't wait for it to be developed. And basically they're swooning over it. Our point again was that perhaps we still have an opportunity to persuade them to take a look at some of the most egregious aspects of it, and to at least agree that some of these public amenities aren't going to work. But there's absolutely no doubt it's being approved. And it's probably going to be approved within the next 4 weeks, actually. So, and they were actually even missing a planning and zoning commissioner or two. So 2 new ones just got appointed. And one of the 2 that just got appointed was one of the most vocal proponents of the TOD regulation, very, very vocal. So even having a new person on who may come with a fresh perspective to take a second look at how this is being planned out is going to work. So
the one thing that I think could probably help us all is that, the traffic is a big issue here, and it's going to become even worse. Unfortunately, like we all know, the developer has his own traffic consultant who is going to say that there's not going to be any issue with traffic. And the only way to maybe have it the only way to do something about that is to hire an independent traffic consultant, or have the city hire someone. Unfortunately, I don't trust the city too much in hiring anyone. But I think that the only way might be to, like I said before, to hire an independent traffic engineer to review the traffic patterns and to see.
The traffic. The city has actually I'm not sure when you hopped on the meeting tonight, Lou, but I had showed everybody that the independent traffic review, AKRF, was hired by the city. The applicant has to pay the fees. They finished their review on Thursday, and their review was posted on the city website on Friday. with the responses from Hardesty and Hanover. So that process is now done. They pointed out a few pretty obvious things, but they certainly didn't do the in-depth that we would look to do. We are considering hiring a third, another party traffic engineer to take a look at the two of them, but that's pretty expensive and time is not of the essence. But the third-party traffic review is done, and the third-party architectural review is supposed to be posted this week. So the zone required both of those, and both of those are in progress.
Yeah, the only other thing that I recommend also is, I mean, would probably be expensive, is to hire a plan and zoning lawyer, attorney, that can really dig into all the requirements and onto all the that's going on here. And there are a couple out there who are very sharp. And I think sometimes I've been in front of this hearing so many times that they just don't seem to listen to the common person. They do pay a lot of attention to attorneys and lawyers, though. That's what I noticed with this boards, is that the regular person can speak until we turn blue, but when an attorney speaks up, they can't listen.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Lou. It's good to see you. I appreciate the help when you are able to give it to us, and if you can continue to take a look at that. And it's all good advice and stuff we're considering. I won't get into the debate about us hiring a lawyer. There were some complications with that with Norton. You may recall that we had to funnel contributions and funding through another neighborhood group, but it is still something we're going to pursue to get our own experts, because you're right, we can talk to we're blue in the face. But I do want to hear from some other people, so I'll come back to you if you're still on, Lou, but we got a lot of hands that are raised up. But
sorry about the long time.
No, that's okay. Thanks. All good stuff. And so, if you think of anything else that we should be doing, email me as usual. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, next up we have Patrick and Shannon.
Okay.
How are you, Charles and Diane? I want to thank you. Great evening.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yep. So in no particular order right now, because I was just making notes as the conversation was going on. One concept that we need to deal with is this is happening, and all we can do is try and make it less painful. Right? That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay, so that's painful in itself.
Yes.
And there were suggestions made about is there any violation of requirements that could be leaned on, and have they the developers misrepresented anything? And as Lou said, they're not going to listen. They're not going to listen to anyone who doesn't have a JD degree, right? And they're only going to start to listen to people who have money, and say, okay, if you don't listen to me, then it's going to cost you money, because I'm going to make you. All right, and we'll take it all to court. So what if your initial position on this is happening, we can only mitigate what's going on? What are the key things that
we need to focus
we
on?
need? You were talking about having petitions and people showing up, et cetera, okay? And I'm in the marketing business, and in the marketing business, the question is, if you're successful, what does that look like?
Oh, great. That's a great way to put that. And I guess that is the, back into the end result, and then say, how do we get there?
Yep.
I think in most people's mind, the answer to that is, if we're successful, it would be less residential units, It would be scaled down structure in terms of the height and the placement. It would be more meaningful public amenities, and we're relying on people to tell us, what they really want, but also public amenities that would be forward of the buildings. In other words, we have a cemetery right across the street, which they depict as a park, by the way. It's crazy, and they call it the Green, which drives us nuts.
Yes.
But when we were first talking about public amenities with TOD and the EVTZ zone, one of the things was to make sure that people had public amenities that were out front, so people knew that they could use it. So public plazas would have to be in the front of the building and not in the rear, and public seating and public amenities. So there would be, kind of what would it look like? I think it would be set back further from the road. Is one major concern that people have. Instead of having the 5 disjointed architectural buildings, attached together, starting the canyon effect we always talk about, you could have some separation, more of like a little village type with mixed use in each one of the village structures. So it would be more open, and perhaps more, you would want to see more from the East Avenue side, looking through the parcel to the to Mill Pond. I think there would be, things like, even down into the detail, people would be looking for less glass on the building because of the reflection and the birds and lighting and all of that. And quite frankly, I think there's a lot of concern about how they're jerry-rigging the retail there to be in a 3.5-story glass building on one corner, instead of New England style, where you have activated uses on the ground floor, like I mentioned before, like little boutiques and things. I think that's more. So that's a good question to say, what would it look like, and then back into that if it was something that was more agreeable. No one I've talked to, except for the bike enthusiasts for some reason, because I think this thing is dangerous, but no one I've talked to is in favor of reducing Cemetery Street to 1 lane. But that has nothing to do with the applicant's development. It's actually with the city.
That's been approved. The 1 lane's been approved.
No, well, they keep saying that they anticipate the DOT approval, but I have sources at the DOT who say not so fast. So they have serious concerns about what's being proposed there.
Look, because this is not about the first 2 items that I talked about, but in terms of traffic, if that turns into 1 lane,
forget it.
Then the people that live down where I live near Pastor Beach, or the people that live down by, on the other side of the canal, add 20 minutes onto your commute to get to 95. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating. Add double your commute, and
It's dangerous.
and then on the way back. In the evening, it's even worse.
Yeah.
So all right. So we've got a couple of things. We need to have a couple of headlines to lean on here, right? And because if it's going to happen, we need to figure out what the headlines are, and we need to figure out what are the points of leverage we have, to make that, that make sense.
And if you have, are you able to email in to me or work with me, offline to share some of what you think would be effective in terms of, the messaging, and then carrying that into, the toolkit of where we go forward? Yeah. Because also, to Lou's point, we know that if it's just us and we don't have professional data either that we research and present, or have professionals do it themselves and hire them, which is a lot of money, that we're not going to get that far.
No, you're absolutely right. Look, the traffic stuff, I don't know what studies have been done, what the city has done, or anything else.
Yeah, just the two.
But
Mhm.
between you and I, it's going to be what they wanted it to say.
Yeah,
So
no significant impact,
yeah,
no level of service change. They're contending that that they're making it safer for pedestrians, bikers, and vehicles.
and,
Um,
Complete opposite.
and explain that by the numbers, but
Mhm.
they don't. I mean, it's
Right.
a qualitative thing. Look, I don't want to keep going. I
Mhm.
will follow up with you. I would also ask if Lou, if you would follow on here, and if I could copy you on this so that you can make sure we're on the rails and we're being smart about it. Because like I said, I'm a marketing guy. I sell things. I sell concepts. I sell ideas. You do the same thing. I just want you to be able to. I want you to be able to weigh in on what I'm suggesting, just to see that it's that it's important enough. Because we only have a couple more pitches here. We don't have a lot of time.
Mhm. Yeah, it's true, and them holding us up, the fact that they're even considering moving to public hearing in the absence of all the data being available to the commissioners blows my mind. I mean, how do you even talk about a public hearing if the traffic third party review was posted
already
on
been
Friday?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
and
No,
the Steve Kleppen thinks that it's probably not going to be any later than their February 15th meeting. We're
They're
talking
real-
about literally a month.
it sounds like a railroad. Yeah, sounds like
Yeah.
a railroad. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hands up. I'm sorry. I know I see people dropping off. I'll only say again that I'll stay on till midnight. So if there's people who want to stay on, and we do record it, and it is recorded, and we will post. But who's next that hasn't talked
Okay.
yet? Charles.
Next up is Liz.
Yes, hi. I know I have my audio on if you can hear me, but my webcam is not working.
Yep,
So
can hear
sorry
you.
about
Hi,
that.
Liz.
Hi, thank you, Diane, and thank you, Charles, for holding this meeting. I want to let you know who I am. I'm actually the warden for the Christ Episcopal Church that sits on Gregory
Oh.
Boulevard and Emerson
Oh.
on the corner.
Hi,
So,
Liz. Okay.
Yes, I joined your, newsletter. And, the church is interested in being a part of the association for being in the neighborhood, though I'm not a resident of the neighborhood.
Right.
However, I wanted to update you on a couple of things. We were actually contacted by the lawyers for the project as an adjoining property owner for our interest. And I did listen to the Mill Pond meeting that the city had. I believe it was on the 4th of January. And I did contact Steve Kleppen, who got back to me right away, and the lawyer, and put me together in a meeting with them to discuss what I saw as, potential questions I had about how it would affect our driveway, what their traffic pattern was showing, because they had alternative 1 and 2, as you know, in the January 4th meeting from the traffic engineer, and he joined the meeting as well. So, I have to say, and I wanted to share with the group some of the things that transpired in that meeting that I had with them, was that they are planning on going 1 lane over there on Cemetery. They are planning on reducing the width of the road, and how our driveway would conflict with, whether it's alternative 1 or 2 is a deep question. And I raised that, question with them. They are scheduled to come out, and meet with me in person on that aspect of it. But I noted to them in the traffic, pattern where they're saying, they don't expect, much more volume. And, I said, I found that to be quite interesting that, you're bringing 77 units and retail, into where formerly it was just a bank where you have, maybe 15, 20 people coming or going all day. And that's not going to bring extra traffic to the area. And what you're doing is shortening and making the road a little bit more narrow. Sure, you're going to slow the traffic down there, but you're bringing an incredible amount of density to the area. So what you're thinking is kind of pie in the sky if you think that's not going to be way more congested than it is today. So, all these things considered, I rate, also to note that road there, is a state
Yes.
operated road. So, when I raised the point of how are you going to slow that traffic down, because it's probably going to be dangerous for both pedestrians in the crosswalks and bike travel there, especially as a narrowed road with a sidewalk by the cemetery. His thought process there was, oh, well, we can't put a traffic light there, because that was my thought. Why aren't you going to you need a traffic light on one of those intersections where they intersect. Otherwise, we may have a terrible time, getting in and out of our, egress, which we have a real interest as an adjoining property owner that we need to be able to come and go to our property without, a hassle. So, that was my take on it. And, they said, oh, well, that could take how long to apply for. I said, it's not about how long it takes. It's about, should it be a requirement there and the danger that it may pose to people walking in the neighborhood, so that was my take on it. They're supposed to meet with us again. But, if you're going to talk about how you might approach, obviously, as you said, and I agree with you completely as a 22-year realtor, and having some, some thought, I did look at the plans, et cetera. Some of the only things I could think of that you would, even bring up here in modifying this project would be questions regarding what are the current EPA tests over there for the mill pond. That's an interesting question that nobody's brought, and I haven't seen any paperwork about. Some of the drainage plans that they have in their architectural blueprints are questionable and could certainly, stand for more solid interpretation and expectation, and how those drainage, plans might impede drainage in the neighboring communities. And I think that's a big one there. The density, I don't think we have much, you would have much of a fight on anymore, as other people have already discussed. But, as I said, the visual height, I thought that was an important note to note. And the traffic pattern over there. They told me they were finalizing the traffic pattern in 1 week. So that's interesting. I know you said a month, but this is what I was told. So I will continue to be in touch with them, and I will share, my knowledge of what I learn with you as well. We at the church were neither taking a position of approve or disapprove of the project in and of itself. However, we are an interested party in the neighborhood as to how it will affect our neighborhood.
Yeah, especially for sure. Thanks, Liz, for all of that. That's very helpful. I do know that, Attorney Adam Blank is the attorney who represents them. And through all his applications, he's always been very agreeable to meeting with anyone who has questions, or coming before ENNA, for example. So it's good that you have that communication, because I know one of the things that they are concerned about is the church driveway there. But also, every time we raise this point about Cemetery Street, it's we're not quite sure, if it's what came first, the chicken or the egg, because the changing to one lane was never a consideration until this development application came forward. We think the only reason they're looking at it is because it allows them to do two things. It allows them to have the building right up to what would then be the new sidewalk, and it allows them to have the additional parking that they ultimately would need, and to have it on street. And the only way for that to work is for them to take away that lane. And I think that's really what's driving it. I do want to say something though, Liz, if you're still on there though, and
yes,
for everyone, I'm going to double check what I read, but when I was reading through the traffic analysis, and oh my gosh, you'd rather have a root canal with no Novocaine, believe me, if you guys ever read traffic stuff from Hardesty. Their traffic counts there, they said that they did, and they have to take into account other traffic counts that are on record, by the way. And they also look into build and no build data, meaning if nothing at all got built, how would traffic be, etc. But the stat that I saw that they used primarily were traffic counts that they took in March of I think it was 2021. And they pat themselves on the back because they took it at a time when school is in session. That used to be one of our pet peeves. But March is not the height of Cemetery Street traffic.
No,
It's
summertime
obviously
is
the beach. I mean,
summertime.
take something there when the boat show is going on, and also
Or
they
the Oyster Festival or the boat show, the Oyster Festival. I raised
Yeah.
all these points
the
with
dog
them.
show, the
and the
4th of July,
fireworks.
yeah,
Yes.
even the the camper walk, the charitable stuff that goes on. But also too, they don't take into account the they're allowed to do an analysis on the traffic that says as compared to the prior use. Well, when you look at the standards that they use for defining peak hours, their peak hours are actually before the bank opened, before 9 a.m. And then the bulk of the peak trips are after that bank closed, which was 5 o'clock on weekdays. And the bank was only open 9 to 12 on Saturdays and nothing on Sunday. So how they skew their traffic in their favor is why you need the third party review. But because
I
they
agree.
posted their review on Friday, and I just took a look, these guys really just rubber stamped it. They put in some questions that were obvious just to make it look like they did a review. But they're the same firm, I think, that's doing a third party review on Wegmans as well. So they're probably tied up. But yeah, it's just bogus with the traffic stuff.
Well,
Lou's point, into Patrick's point, the only way to get around it is for ENNA to try to get funding to hire someone who is kind of out of the area.
well, I felt too that, our biggest issue with the whole project, the way I saw it, was largely the traffic pattern over there because we're right across the street,
Right.
And we had used the Wells Fargo parking lot for overflow for some of our
Right.
events for years. So,
Yeah.
but we are considered an adjoining interested party. So
Right.
I'm not sure where we would come in if we were to request some kind of third party traffic
Well, you would come in
evaluation as an
in a-
adjoining property owner.
In a big way, you would come in because
Correct.
because if there is legal funding, you see, ENNA is a 501c3, and it's kind of a sticky widget for us in terms of funding
So is
that
the
would be used in
church.
terms of legal.
Yep.
But anyone who can actually be an intervener or have standing as a party
Correct.
to this action, you would be considered one. Anyone who's in a butter would be considered one.
Yes,
And
which I
so
know from
you
my
do
real
have-
estate work as well. So, that is something I'm very on
Right.
top of, and that's why they probably agreed to meet with me in like
Probably.
15 minutes,
Exactly, Liz.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I will
It's-
keep you posted because we are very
Thanks.
interested in the traffic congestion in the
Thanks.
area.
Yeah.
And I understand everybody's concerns about the project. Like I said, we're being very neutral as to, we know it's going to happen, et cetera.
Right.
It could bring people to the church. That's how we're
Sure.
looking at it in a positive,
Sure.
but we are also looking at the impact, to everyone as well, including
Yeah.
ourselves. So we are an interested party and we
Yeah.
will keep you posted on.
Appreciate that
Yeah.
too, because we're respectful too. I mean, you guys are looking for souls, and Sweet Ashley's
Sure.
looking for ice cream people, and no, we get that, and we certainly get that benefit, and and thanks for kind of balancing those two needs there. They
Yeah.
really reached out to me. It was really nice to meet you, Liz, in this even in Zoom. So
Thank
but
you.
equally,
Sorry about the
I'm happy to
webcam.
chat. What's
Yes.
that? I'm sorry.
I said, sorry about the webcam.
Yep. No worries. Thanks.
All right, thanks. You
Okay.
guys can move on. I know a lot of people
Okay.
want to speak, but thank you
Okay.
very much for holding this.
Thanks,
tonight.
Liz. Appreciate it. Okay.
Okay, next up, we have someone on the phone. Unfortunately, I do not have a name.
Okay.
Hello, are you
So do you
there?
have the last 4 digits or?
Yes,
go.
it is 3757. Hello?
Hi, yeah, that's me. Hi, how are you?
Well,
Hi,
you hear
yes, can
me?
we have your name?
Yes, it's Nanette. Hi, Diane. I really appreciate what both of you are doing. I can't imagine your hours of time put into all of this, and living in the area for much of my life, I'm very, very grateful for all your efforts on the entire neighborhood's behalf.
Thanks, Annette. Thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. Here are my thoughts. My thoughts are not enough people know about this. I'm on an area website called the Nextdoor website. And just a few days ago, a woman posted something about what's going on there. And
Right.
from the reaction she got, I was able to realize that almost nobody who responded to her, or not nobody, maybe half of the people who responded were somewhat aware of this, but there were a lot of people who didn't know anything about it, and certainly don't know enough about it and how it's going to impact their lives.
Yeah.
So I'm here tonight to say, I think that somehow you've got to find a way to deliver this message to a wider audience, whether that's going to the press and being interviewed, whether that's speaking with Nancy on Norwalk, who may or may not be doing stories on this that I'm not aware of. If she's not, she probably would be. That is you guys yourselves getting on Nextdoor, and every time you send me an email posting on there that there's going to be, a meeting like this, I think the entire community has got to get involved, because while I understand after hearing this whole call that you're saying it's pretty much a done deal, I don't look at life like that. I just don't ever see anything as a done deal until it's done. And I think if you had lots and lots of people living in all the little homes in these surrounding communities, and people living in the homes, even beyond this community, that have to pass through this community to get to, like the Pine Hill areas, and all the people who sort of live into the, I'm not good with directions, but in towards the Westport line. I think a lot of those people, who, some of them rather prominent individuals in the community, maybe some of them don't even know about this. And there's an assumption that they do, but they don't, especially in terms of exactly what's going to be happening there.
Well, let me just, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second, though, just so that I can clarify as well, though. So on Nextdoor.com, we actually have two present there. One, I post there personally, and I post the all the meetings. I post the stuff that we post on Facebook, on our website, on Instagram, and through our email newsletter, which is almost weekly. But then, in addition to that, we actually have an East Norwalk Neighborhood Association page, where we have hundreds of people.
I don't even know that.
So,
I'm not
okay,
aware
so
of
that's
that.
so that's interesting, because we have hundreds of people who then, because it's not just East Norwalk, but Nextdoor.com, we have a lot of people that sign up for all areas on Nextdoor, and then they'll go in, and then they'll apply to join in on the East Norwalk Neighborhood Association page. On that page, that's the page where we generally require either 06855 residency, or we cross over a little bit into 06851. But on regular Nextdoor.com, we post there whenever we post to Facebook and every other site. So Mill Pond has been, and TOD has been posted there now for 3 years consistently. I was glad to see that other posting started to rattle a few cages. In terms of Old Saugatuck and Pine Hill, we have a lot of penetration there, because we started to get into the area where we had, I don't know if you recall 2 years ago, but the massive undertaking that got the Norton application withdrawn. And
I knew a little bit. I didn't.
Really a lot of that came from that area, because that was one where we had to funnel through funding so that they could file as interveners with the attorney to be able to pay the attorney. So I get it. And that's what we're talking about. We literally just did a 200 flyer drop. We do postcard mailings. So we're using as many vehicles as we can. And we were just looking to add in the hour is not as cooperative as they used to be when they were the hour before Hearst bought them. So I do appreciate that. And you know, we do, whenever there's another avenue, like we just kind of use everything we can, like I'm even putting flyers up in local businesses. I didn't mean to suggest also like it's a done deal. I know when you say like nothing's done until it's done, and I tend to agree with you, Nanette, but I think in terms of it being a done deal, that there is going to be a big residential complex there is what I meant. People are still asking for, can't the city buy it and make it a park, or can't, that's what we're talking about, like that ship has sailed, that's not going to happen. The part that's
Got
not
it.
a done deal is, despite the amount of money they've spent with Minefield, and they're basically partners, so you know, we're not talking like they went out and hired an extraordinary, you know, firm from some, you know, some place in New York or something. But I mean, what we're looking to do now is to say, we recognize that this thing is essentially agreed to, but now how do we improve it, get improvements in that are more meaningful, or mitigate the really kind of, you know, objectionable things that are going on. I just want to
No,
make
and
sure I
that-
was
and
clear
that's
on that. I didn't want to.
And that's actually what I meant too. I mean, I agree with
Yeah.
you. I think it sounds like they've come far enough along. They've
Mhm.
got everyone in their pocket that they need to have in their pocket in terms of planning and zoning, et cetera. But to at least try to, you know, fight them on the height of this building, on the setbacks of this building, things like that. And I really apologize. I'm on Nextdoor all the time. I've never seen what you're telling me you're
Oh.
posting.
It's
So
like-
maybe it's me being not
Yes.
savvy enough when it comes to
Yeah.
using websites and stuff.
Yeah.
And in that case, I'm really disappointed that there aren't more people on this call. Like I would have hoped that there would be, you know, equal passion from everyone
Mhm.
in this tiny community, because
Yeah.
I see this as the means to a
Mhm.
beginning that we
Mhm.
can't even conceptualize
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah.
Because I think they have
Yeah.
much greater plans for this area that I personally love the way that it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't really look, I don't
So-
want to, I certainly don't want to be a proponent and support apathy, but I do say, people who have listened to me for a long time now will say, I do give a lot of people in the community a pass when we're looking at how many people show up for meetings. You know, people who are, you know, they have young children and they're taking care of aging parents, or they're, you know, they're commuting in and they don't get home until late. But I want to say something else, is that in the past 8 years, we've had what we call whack-a-mole in East Norwalk. And we really have a large percentage of what's regularly kind of regular people that are engaged. And of course, we'd always show up at our real meetings when we met at the Marvin Senior Housing, like in person, that are just now, they're just battle weary and just frustrated, and they're feeling disenfranchised. And
I get it.
once TOD went through, and we really couldn't make the impact to improve that on the front end, to Patrick and Lou's point earlier, people really kind of felt like, you know, why bother? Why?
I
And
understand.
I just hate that, and it hurts my heart. And you know, speaking of nextdoor.com, I have to say too, I tend to be a little inflammatory there when it's me, because I'm trying to pique people's interest. So I have headlines that I think, you know, will horrify people to at least open it up and read it. So I'm going to have to do a better job of that. But you know, with Nextdoor. But I appreciate that feedback, and we'll, you know, certainly continue to look at every avenue we can to get the word out. And we just now had sent something out to our board of directors in terms of being able to utilize and collaborate with Nancy on Norwalk. There's a long history there that really kind of prevented us from interacting. A lot of it had to do with their standards. But their board,
Oh.
their own board recently made some changes in the past few months that we weren't aware of. And it looks now something that it may be a little bit more agreeable, so that we can not only use that format, but have better dialogue, and hopefully try to show both sides of the story from there. Because we do realize, I see somebody's hand up, because I do want to say, we do realize there's a fair amount of people in Norwalk, and a handful of people in East Norwalk proper, that are very, very supportive of not only TOD, but this development in particular, very eager for it to be built as it is. So we're going to, if you, I don't want to cut you off though, Nanette, so we wanted to, and we can come back around again too, if we need to.
That's okay. That's okay. No, thank you so much for your time. And again, thank you both for all you're doing and your whole team. I'm truly grateful to you all. I think you're doing an incredible job, and I can't imagine the hours that you're putting into all of this, but, you know, keep up the good work. And I hope that, you know, those of us that are involved to whatever degree help give you energy to keep on going.
Great,
So
thanks.
thank you
Yeah,
all.
yep. Yeah, thanks. And if you,
Thank you.
and like I said, it's just, you know, we're just kind of like guiding and setting directive, but ENNA really is all of you guys. So, you know, when we come out and we ask for help, then to the extent that you have an ability or a desire to pick something that you can do out of the toolkit and helping us, we appreciate that. Because the ENNA is really, it's the people that live here. It's not
Will
me.
do. I agree. I agree.
Thank you.
Got
Nice
it.
to meet you.
Thank you. You also.
Thanks.
Take good
Thanks.
care.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Hey, next up we have Ben.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for
Ben,
the
Ben, I'm so glad you're on because it's Diane here. I want to make sure that that you did hop on in terms of the other side of the story, as the famous broadcaster used to say.
well, I appreciate the intro there, and you know, I wouldn't miss this. So yeah, for anyone who's not familiar with me, I'm Ben. I live at 262 East Avenue, so I'm right across the street from this parcel, so I'm really familiar with the area. And I just wanted to offer my opinion to the group, since it's a little bit different from most of the opinions that I've heard expressed here today. Just to maybe offer an alternative way of looking at it, and seeing the upsides that it can provide. So my first principle when it comes to, you know, all things about how our cities are designed and laid out is that right now, like in Connecticut, we just don't have enough housing, and the housing prices are just absurd. It's probably no secret to many of you that Connecticut has the lowest rental vacancy rate in the country, at like 2% as of a few months ago. I know the market's kind of doing a whole bunch of things right now, so maybe it's a little bit different as far as the specific number goes, but there's not enough rental units in particular, but also in terms of like condos and single family housing. We just are at a big deficit, and we need to build our way out essentially. So that's kind of the starting point from where I think about all this. And then as long as you're going to build, you want to try to build in a place where you can leverage some existing density, existing businesses, and especially existing transit infrastructure. You know, that's the whole concept behind TOD. That's why we have the East Village Transit Zone, as I think we rightly should have. I think that's a great idea. And this site being so close to the East Norwalk train station really makes it ideally suited for the kind of larger multifamily housing that's being proposed here. And so I know a lot of people like East Norwalk the way it is, and they've been here for many years. And I'll freely admit that I've not been here for nearly as long. And I respect the people are established here, of course. But I think that there's a lot of room for improvement in East Norwalk, and there's a lot that we can do to build for ourselves a neighborhood where we aren't tied to our cars for all of our daily needs. The streets aren't choked with traffic constantly. You can get the things that you need on a daily basis, you know, groceries, you know, restaurants, doctor's offices, ideally workplaces, without having to hop in your car. You could walk, you can bike, you can take transit. And that kind of a neighborhood is impossible to have without developments like this. So that's like personally why I see so much benefit in it being built. basically as proposed. Like, we're at a deficit with regards to housing. I think that 4 stories and 77 units is not really all that overbearing. That size of building is used in many cities all over the world, really, to create really great, safe, human scale environments that are a pleasure to walk around in. Just a pleasure to be in, as opposed to being next to a road with a bunch of high speed traffic, which is definitely the experience today along East Avenue, along Gregory. So there's a lot more I could say. I especially have a lot of thoughts about what people have said regarding the traffic. I think that maybe a lot of the concerns are a little bit being blown out of proportion, in my view. As far as those 2 alternatives go, that the developers discussed, I'm partial to the one with the partial roundabout. I think that'll do a lot to help slow down the people flying up Gregory. I have to navigate that stretch of Gregory on my bike every day, and it's terrifying because people just come blazing up that stretch, and it can be a lot to handle. So anything that helps to like slow the pace of traffic is something that I'm typically for. So yeah, anyway, I know it's late. I appreciate everyone who is on this late, that they care enough to be here. Yeah, I think that's about it from me.
Thanks, Ben. And I really do. I do appreciate you coming on the calls, because I know that you represent a kind of a minority view in terms of East Norwalk proper, and but we do want to hear from all views, and hopefully there's compromise on what people want and what's really needed. Before we go on to the next person, I do like to address some of the things that others are hearing, though, because we know about a housing shortage, and there's particularly a shortage of affordable housing. What really kind of gets under our skin is that many of these developments, and even the concept of TOD itself, is based on a premise that got sold on, we need affordable housing, and the way to do that is with density and location and amenities and transportation that allows for developers to build affordable housing, or even is missing middle type housing. The fact of the matter is that if you go back many years, probably 10 years, we're not looking at any development that has these types of density and impact on our quality of life that has affordable housing. And so if it were truly affordable housing, I think people would be more agreeable to it. But when we're talking about $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month in rent, and we're not even getting the 10% workforce housing, by the way, in this unit, because they're able to negotiate away based on the number of bedrooms. There's only going to be 7 workforce houses, and we'll save it for another night, but workforce housing is not considered affordable housing by any stretch of the imagination. I personally, and I know one other person said it, I'd rather see all affordable and even lower income, and having been born and spent a portion of my life in public housing, even public housing. But this is strictly for the benefit of making developers rich. So I know, Ben, you and I will debate this for forever. It should be in person over cocktails. That's all I can say at this point. But,
I'd like that.
I mean, and in terms of the cars, it's another chicken or the egg. I mean, like, do you build these things first and then you have the amenities around it, and you hope that people then let go of their cars? But the fact of the matter is, we live in a part of the country, in Norwalk itself, where you're still going to need a car. And so when you talk about, car light versus car heavy, I get it. But that impact isn't going to be seen very quickly. And in the meantime, it is going to have a pretty dramatic impact, I think, on congestion. And congestion, by the way, and gridlock leads to road rage. So when you're talking about people speeding, when you're doing these kind of road diets and these changes, and then people are having a harder time getting around. When they do reach the point of a free point and kind of a straightaway, they're more inclined to speed and be a little bit more reckless at that point too. But, all good points. So, we're looking for a balance. I would say, I know I am concerned when I do, I think you've said in the past that you wish this development there was even larger than what it's going to be. And this is where we're talking about spreading the wealth so that we're not having these large developments. We need infill development. We need to go back to courtyard developments and duplexes and really take all the toolkits of housing so that what we fear is going to happen doesn't happen, which is the canyonization of East Avenue. And once this development goes through, if it goes through without a resistance from the community to try to fix it, the next one is right around the corner. I mean, we're talking right there at Van Zant. We're talking St. Thomas School. We're talking Pennies. We're talking the parcel at up at I-95. You can just go up and down the road, and that's what the fear is there. So.
Yeah, if I could just say one more thing before we
Sure.
move on, because
Sure.
I know it's late. Just to say this in front of everyone else here, because I hear this all the time about when you see a development like this that's predominantly, if not entirely, market rate housing.
Mhm.
How is that affordable? How does that actually help with our affordability crisis? Like, it's definitely true that those units will be expensive. I mean, they're more expensive than I'm willing to pay.
Mhm.
But they're at a rate that some people are willing to pay, because these things all pretty much fill up once they're built. And building new housing at market rate or otherwise, just its presence in the first place helps reduce housing prices over a wide area. So I am also kind of in your camp of all the above approach to housing. Like, we need more ADUs. I was kind of disappointed with how that all played out. We need
Right.
more public housing. I think public housing gets a bad reputation, unfortunately,
Mhm.
but we also need more market rate as
Yes.
well. And then, more things that are just like, directly subsidized, like the 10% affordability rule. I think that's a great start. So yeah, like, really the more the merrier. Like,
Gotcha.
if you're building
Gotcha.
new
Yeah.
units like of any variety, you're helping the problem.
Yep, I got you. Okay, we still got a lot of people on here. Charles,
Okay, Patrick would like to join in one more
Okay.
time.
Is there anyone who has their hand raised that hasn't spoken yet? And then we'll do the double backs.
No, actually.
Okay. We'll come back to Patrick, and then you can go back to chat if you want after that, Charles, too. I think there was a ton of stuff in chat maybe I can answer. And like I said, people can just drop off, don't feel rude. But like I said, I'll stay on as long as somebody's on that wants to chat.
Okay, Patrick.
Hi, Patrick.
Oh, good. Yeah. So Ben, my question was relative to the experience with Washington Village on the other side of the bay. How do you think this plays?
Good question.
So when you say relative to Sono, like in what sense?
Not Sono, Washington Village that was replaced. Have you not been here long enough to know
Yeah,
what happened?
I am fairly new, so you'll have
Okay.
to bear with me if I don't know the complete history.
Okay, so that was housing. That was affordable housing. It was developed after World War II. And it continued on up until, what was it, finished 5 years ago? What I'd say 4 years ago. Right. And so the impact of what went on with, the exchange of Washington Village to where we are now, the individuals that were living in Washington Village, if they were current, and I'm sure, look, there's nothing completely clean on this. If they were current with their rents, they could move back into a facility, with rent control and affordable housing. Then the rest of the place was built to market. It really had nothing to do with what was going on, in terms of providing affordable housing. And I think what's going to happen here, I don't know, what size families are contemplated for the facilities that are going to be, across the street from the cemetery. But I got to tell you, if there's big families, if there's families with 2 and 3 cars, it's going to be a problem.
So if I understand correctly about Washington Village, and I'll go look this up on my own time too, because I'm always trying to learn more about Norwalk since I hadn't been here that long in the grand scheme of things. There was some housing. It was replaced with a new building. Is this one of the buildings like around Sono, like a little bit south of Sono?
Not one.
Okay.
Probably 6.
Okay.
And the Washington Village buildings, by the way, the Washington Village buildings were the oldest affordable housing in the United States after World War II. And it was kept up. I mean, it was a great story. But when they redid it, it was not about affordable housing. It was not. This is, your notion of providing affordable housing here. It's not going to hold, and the market is not there for it. What's happening here is building up an infrastructure that is going to choke the traffic and the facilities in this area.
And I think Patrick too, we've already seen that the impact that Ben would hope it would have, in terms of then freeing up, presumably someone moves up from a lower rent facility into one that's a little higher rent, and it's kind of that whole trickle up and down impact. But Washington Village is a great example of that.
It didn't happen.
It didn't happen. It's probably one of the saddest. I literally can almost cry when someone mentions Washington Village. Ben, I will fill you in on the backstory of that, and I'll be sure to be fair and honest and give you both perspectives on it. But it's a great example of where a premise of being able to modify, for affordable housing and public housing, completely then really was just tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that ultimately is just private in market rate. And it was $300 million in taxpayer money, by the way, that supported that. I'll call it a boondoggle. So I do understand where you're talking about, as you're increasing market rate, and then people then who are making more are moving into it, and that's freeing up something. So maybe they're freed up a $1,000 apartment, and now because they moved into a $2,000 apartment, I get that, in theory. But what's happening then is all this market rate stuff then is driving up the cost of retail, the cost of rentals in every category. So what used to be a fairly reasonable $800 one bedroom is now, $2,100 one bedroom, because it's all relative.
So I think one big difference there that hasn't been considered, regardless of what happened with that development, and I'm happy to go learn about that, of course, is that we're not talking about demolishing existing like rent controlled affordable housing in this case. Like we're starting with 0 units of housing and we're going up to 77 instead of taking away some and adding some more back in. And then the conversation of like, when you build a new development, what happens to real estate values in the area, like directly around it, that's complicated. And it's another conversation, but I think that's a little bit different from what we were talking about originally. So the big win here in my eyes is that we're going from 0 to not 0. Whereas with Washington Village, that does get a little more complicated.
But
when you're going from like, purpose-built rent-controlled housing, which is great, and we should have more of it. And the like model that was implemented widely after World War II that's fallen out of favor is really kind of tragic. You know, now affordable housing is kind of, or like, you know, public housing is just like code for like housing for people who like can't, you know, afford anything else. But that's not how it used to be. Like public housing used to be for like a wide spectrum of incomes, you know, lower end, middle end. And I think that was great. And unfortunately, we've, you know, gone away from that to our detriment.
Yeah.
It's interesting too to see how people would feel about the 77 units at Mill Pond if there was a better mix of affordability within the unit. And to see how that would work out, but we know that the developers kind of, you know, they're really kind of sidestepping the real question of what those units are going to cost and what the impact is going to be. Because with a lot of those units being at 4 bedrooms is going to be an impact, you know, to Patrick's point, not just the traffic, but also the impact on city services as well. And we didn't even get to the point of talking about that tonight, about infrastructure and, you know, police, fire, ambulance, water, sewer capacity, the school system, et cetera. So. Yeah,
no,
so when we get back to being in person, the whole housing thing, I think, has to be an ENNA workshop. It's fascinating.
4 bedrooms is double the normal population density.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. All right. Does anybody else have their hand up, or are
no,
there people waiting in chat who I know there's a lot of comments in here. I think we get a chat transcript, luckily, in addition to the recording, but any questions in there?
Well, just scanning it, going back to parking concerns, when Liz was talking about the church, it's important to note that there are other houses of worship in the area, also
Yes.
the Masonic Temple, and also an assisted living facility, and how the overspill of parking might affect those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because we have the senior housing right there. And so we need to take that into account, because in some of those cases too, again, we had a prior use that didn't really have an impact on the weekend. And now we're going to have a use that's probably going to have heavy weekend. And look, and just to the point, I've said this to Ben before and he knows it. Absolutely no one is in favor now or have ever been in favor of the Wells Fargo parcel. It's absolutely insane to have that tiny little bank with a drive-through, and all that asphalt is just a heat zone, and a complete misuse of the parcel, and all the runoff that wasn't mitigated at that point. Yes, there is going to be some pervious, and it's going to be improvement to the quality of what does run off. But I want to make a point here, and some folks are going to think I'm nasty making it, and quite frankly, at 10 o'clock at night, I'm not sure I'm concerned about that. The fact that it was all that asphalt and that there wasn't the type of landscaping put in that could help to mitigate it, or pervious, or to really have a real impact on the quality of the runoff that was going into Mill Pond, is the fault of the people that own that parcel. So it's not like Spinnaker and Descala and Mill Pond Holdings now are coming in and saying, we're new owners and look what we're going to do because this, needs to be done. Mike Descala has owned that property for decades. And so nothing was done when he owned it then to be able to mitigate the impact that parcel had on our environment in both its use and what it was doing to Mill Pond. So for them to come in and say, now look what we're going to do and make all these improvements to it, I think is a bit disingenuous. But I don't think that we have to go the spectrum of, it's not one or the other. It's not an asphalt jungle with a little drive-through. Oh my gosh, we hate drive-throughs, by the way, too, with spewing exhaust. It's not one extreme or the other to have either that or 77 units, on that parcel with, very little benefit to the community. There's my soapbox. What else is in the chat there?
Just the impact of some of the lighting to the wildlife in the pond.
have to talk to that. So you guys may be familiar with the phenomenon of in the books and all the research being done now on migration patterns of birds. So before in the past, ENNA and other advocacy groups in the city, we would talk about light pollution, which is certainly, one thing. It's like kind of visual graffiti and it's offensive, but it's also light pollution in terms of light in people's windows. But what we weren't talking about, and many of us didn't know, is that the impact of lights at night on the migratory patterns of birds. And Lisa Wexler, the radio host, has had a fascinating speaker on. He's written books. He's an expert on it. I'll see if I can get that podcast out for everyone. Because birds, the migratory birds, for the most part, they migrate at night, when it becomes dark. And artificial light impacts their patterns, and it also throws them off kilter, especially if it's on a path that they're taking where there hadn't been light before. And so one of the things that they do then is they get disoriented and they circle the light, and they're not sure where they're supposed to be going. They ultimately circle and like they die, like they don't migrate. And so it has a lot of impact in terms of the birds. But the other impact is the older one we're talking about, where you have, visual, you have the light pollution. And I think it's going to be from all angles of that building. And for Jesse, I see is still on, and I think there's other Mill Pond folks. We're trying to determine now, especially in the winter time, what impact it's going to have for their view, looking out and seeing, especially like at dinner time, an entire building just lit up with with light pollution over there. So that's a good point when we talk about, because when we talk about pollution now, we talk about air, noise, light, and visual. It's not just the old, car emissions and factory emissions.
Okay, Jessie has her hand up.
I just want to say briefly, because I'm noticing the time here, that I wasn't even considering the migrating birds. I live directly on the pond, and these lights are going to be like right in my backyard. Our very dark, very quiet pond at night is alive with critters out there, with the wildlife, with swans I've been watching for 27 years nest right where, sorry, I have no voice tonight, right where this, I don't even want to call it a monstrosity, where this huge building is going to be right on top of where their safety zone is, where it's normally untouched, it's quiet, it's undisturbed. Now they're going to have huge, and it was in the drawings where they had the lampposts that'll be all along the walkway. So even if no one is in the backyard and we're not taking the noise into consideration, the lights are going to be there. 77 apartments, there's going to be lights on in people's windows. These lampposts are going to be on for safety. I don't know. And I would imagine if it's public space, and especially if you can plug in and charge your phone, there's going to be teenagers, there's going to be people, I don't know, homeless or whatever, people will be there. And never mind the rooftop, they were talking about a roof terrace, I don't know, a space that they could use for, entertainment or whatever else. That's going to happen at night. So the swans and the ducks, and there's so many beautiful birds out there, they're going to leave for sure. The other side of the pond is where it's, busy and lit. They kind of go there to eat and hang out a little bit. But this side of the pond up higher near the property, that's their safety space. That's where they come to nest. And
good point. Thanks, Jessie.
Really
I also asked someone the other day, not an expert, but I'll probably have to find one. I wanted to know what the impact is on the cemetery, because I was kind of joking around with my letters into Luke Shulman, the planning and zoning guy, to say we don't think the residents of the cemetery are going to mind too much the new building. But I was thinking that with the pattern of daylight, our third taxing district funds the historical cemetery. It's not a part of the other cemeteries that are funded through the city and through the historical society. So we pay to maintain that cemetery. And I was wondering what was going to happen with a loss of daylight when you have that shade. with the trees and stuff that are in there, that we pay to maintain. And the person thought that it could have a fairly significant impact on the health and the growth of the plantings in East Norwalk Cemetery. Something else. People may consider it minor, but it's certainly another thing to consider.
Mhm.
And I don't think that we haven't heard anything from the developers about, normally when you have a controversial application like this, it's really going to impact the community. Instead of these kind of, not so wow bonus amenities that now get them to have higher height. Normally what they would do is come to the table and say, we'll pay for all of these benefits. We'll pay for the sidewalks. We'll pay for lighting. We'll pay for the upkeep of the cemetery. We'll, and none of that stuff is on the table. No one has seen that for sure.
There's no reason to. They're getting what they want without us.
No reason to. Yep. And there's and like I said earlier, all of the bonus amenity stuff, and the environmental stuff, and the stuff that's beneficial to the community. Since we developed a new zone, and a zone can be designated for any requirements you want, basically, under state statute. I mean, there are some limits, but certainly we could have made all of those the price of entry. Here's a new zone. If you want to come in and play, then you have to have environmentally silver LEED, qualified buildings. You have to do solar. You have to have this amenity. You have to recycle rainwater on your property. I mean, the list goes down and down and down. And if they don't want to play, they don't play. So
I think at this point, Diane, we really have to focus on maybe 3 major things. Like the traffic is a huge issue.
the traffic for sure.
And they're not going to change the roof scale. They're not going to set those buildings back. I wish they would. They're not going to do it. But maybe we could, as you mentioned, the glass on the windows of the retail space, insist that they not be, modern glass looking. I don't know, something a little bit more fitting in with the East Norwalk.
Right.
That would be, in my opinion, a relatively easy fix, and something that would be kind of hard to say. Like, throw us a bone, give us something here. You know what I mean? If they could make that fit into the area a little bit more, that would be something. I can't even imagine how they're only going to have one entrance and exit. I'm thinking about that going, oh my God, but here we are. Or definitely a way for them to design the entrance to the public space where folks won't feel like they're trespassing on private property. With it being so tucked in the back, I don't think that's going to be utilized.
I agree.
Unless you live in a 10-block radius, that's kind of it. You won't even know about it.
Exactly. For
So
sure.
maybe those would be like 3 things that we could bring, you know what I mean? Because otherwise we're just going round and round. I wish we weren't, but realistically, here we are.
And I think that's what we'll do. We'll narrow it down and, get that back out to folks and, just say, that's part of what we were hoping for in the feedback, to say, what are your concerns? What are your suggestions? What's important to you? So, we hope to continue to get some feedback. We may try to throw together a quick survey as well.
I was just going to say, how would like a doodle or a survey monkey with just simple, write a list of things, maybe 7 or 8 things, and say, pick your top,
just rank them
in order of importance. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's our best bet at this point.
Yeah,
I agree with
disagree with that.
everybody else. It's pretty much done. So, but if we can get a little something is better than a lot of nothing.
I agree.
Oh, so Steve says 20 to 25. That's not going to happen. I wish.
Oh, I just saw that pop up there. I know. I mean, I think there has to be a happy medium. I think, what about, I think, Mike Descala at one point had mentioned to me, maybe, 48, because there's a balance.
I remember that 48 being
right versus right. And I'm thinking, 48. I'm like, even that's much. But then when they came in and slammed us with 78, I think it was 78 to begin with. I was like, wow, this just went down a whole different road of.
And we really are going to suffer getting to and from the beach. I mean, I'm like 1 block off of that property.
Yeah.
But sometimes in the morning, it takes me 15 minutes to get to I-95.
Yeah.
How
Oh, yeah,
crazy
we hear
is
that. Yeah,
I could
people have
walk,
been saying
I could walk
20.
there and back in less
Yeah,
time.
exactly, exactly.
And one lane and a yield on Gregory Boulevard with the school buses and everything.
There's not the land to accommodate that amount of people.
I
There
agree.
isn't. I mean, it's just common sense, isn't it?
It's insanity.
It's insane.
Well, you know,
Build
they don't live here. What do they care?
Well, this is only the beginning too. I just want, again, I hate to be Debbie Downer, but this is probably relatively, small compared to what's coming, folks. And that's why I think that, we have to be effective on this one, in the hopes that on the front end of the other ones, we can try to get that under control on the front end.
Right.
I think what threw us off here was that, I hate to use the word lie, but really what threw us off here was the months and months of lies.
Oh, yeah.
Because we were going down the path of, oh, okay, we don't have to worry because it's going to be, this smaller thing. It's going to be New England style. It's going to be, you could, see through to the mill pond. You could we'll do this, or we'll do that. How about a community room? And we're poof.
There was a talk of, the walkway in the center that goes straight down to the
Yeah.
pond for anybody to see. So yeah, all gone.
Oh,
Maybe there's a way that like environmental architects can come along saying this is the amount of space you have and this is the amount of people you can really have living here.
Yeah.
And then you tell the developers that build something for this amount as opposed to let those bastards, I'm sorry, because that's all they are. They want to dictate their profit line. So
yeah,
that's the problem. And to Ben's point, I'm all for like building stuff, but let's do it in proportion to the neighborhood.
exactly. No one disagrees with that, Steve.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like they're turning it into an inner city area. It's like, well, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Be thoughtful.
I wouldn't mind, some retail if it was small markets, local artisans,
right?
A place for, that kind of. We need a market in this area. That would be
Yeah. There's something I actually heard from some other people that Stu Leonard's actually stopped the development of other supermarkets down around here.
That rumor has been flying around for years, Steve.
Yeah,
I would love to actually find out if that's, there's any truth to it, because at one point someone said there was actually even an agreement with the city that they wouldn't even allow something to come forward. I don't know how true that is, but that has been urban legend forever. I'd like to get to the bottom of that. But Steve, I do want to say to you what you just said. I hope you and all the folks on here and many, many others will consider hopping on the actual public hearing. And the most effective in terms of communication with these folks is when people speak from the heart. And, do be respectful. We do ask people to be respectful. But to speak from the heart and really talk about what you see is going to be the impact, is really going to be the most persuasive stuff, especially if everyone else's point, Jesse and everyone else, is if the final list that we come up with would be considered fair and reasonable by reasonable people. And certainly I love to say, would it be considered fair and reasonable by a judge? Because that's something they have to consider too. Because everything is subject to an appeal. And, if I look at something, I say, I think a reasonable judge would agree with me on this, then it is something that they should take into account. And I hope everybody on this call and 100 more will either be at the public hearing or submit an email in advance, with just that. Because very well said, Steve.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's not about offending anyone. This argument has to be intelligent.
Right.
And it has to be built on logic. I mean, there's a reason why, and it has to be thoughtful.
Right. For sure. Yeah. And the clock is ticking. So, everybody help out.
When is the public hearing? I don't believe they've set a date for that.
They haven't said it, but I'm guessing if I were a betting gal, I'm guessing February 15th. That's my best bet right now.
We need to announce that every which way.
Oh yeah, we'll have another meeting, ahead of it, because we wouldn't normally meet until the 20th.
Yeah.
and we'll just blast it everywhere. And then somehow, I don't know how we'll do this. We're just exhausted, I say me and, a couple board members, but, that's why we need help. We're going to have to pull together quick, a position statement, get the press statement out there and really start a PR campaign. Because what happens, we find when we do that is it's not just East Norwalk people that show up, it's people from all over the community. People say, I don't even live in East Norwalk, but holy cow,
That's
this
why
thing
we
is
have to
wrong. We
narrow
gotta
this
fix
down.
it. And yeah.
In my opinion, Diane, that's why we have to narrow it down. We can't
Yeah.
expect folks to listen to 3-hour-long
Yeah.
meetings and
Yeah.
read
Right.
endless, we're beyond this.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be like bullet points, short and sweet. Here are the whatever 3 to 5 or 6 things that we would really, really, really like to see happen in order for us to live somewhat comfortably with this development.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that's,
and traffic is a huge issue with it.
yes, I agree.
77 apartments,
That needs to be at the top of the list, in my opinion.
but all the sides of the road and then narrowing it, it doesn't make, the whole thing is stupid.
Crazy.
Mhm.
It is. No, right. Stupid is not fair. Crazy is not fair either.
Mhm.
This is insanity, and it's based on greed.
Mhm.
And the people that are developing it will not be living there, and they won't be living around here either.
The quality of our life is going to be irreparably impacted by this development.
Right. But it
Without
also, I suppose you need a precedent for future campaigns as well,
Yes.
so that they
Yeah.
we just had, look at all the other apartments they built by East Norwalk Station.
Mhm.
All
Yeah.
those trees cut
huge.
down.
Yeah.
All but all the apartments now as well. It is totally saturated, and driving around the town at the weekend is impossible. It's this is insane.
Is there anyone else on? I don't like to call out people by name, but people are just listening in, and that's good because you're listening and absorbing all of it, and hopefully you're writing a bunch of notes and say, oh, I can't wait to send this email into the ENNA folks. I hope my email is lighting up tomorrow morning. So keep those ideas coming. And again, anybody who can help, I'm not going to say volunteer. It sounds like too much of a commitment for people, but if there's any way that you think that you can help us, please help us. Charles, thank you.
You're
For
welcome.
co-piloting. You're the best. And whatever board members, George, thank you so much. I'm hanging in there. And for the other folks I see on here, again, I'm not going to call out names. You know who you are. I see you're smiling right there. I'm so happy to see you. And have a good night, everyone. We'll be getting emails out fast and furious. And thank you all so much for caring about and loving our East Norwalk.